say fight back!
Hey, over at ThomHartmann.com, we've got some really cool stuff. A lot of people don't realize that we produce a daily newsletter, and Sue puts we call it Sue's Daily Stack on there, which is literally a link to every story that I've talked about in the show. So all the research is right there. It's free. We don't share or sell our subscriber list. It's there's just it's there. It's there for you. And it's over at ThomHartmann.com. You can sign up for the free newsletter. You also can get my big picture take of the day, which is exclusively over at our website at ThomHartmann.com, as well as links to our videos, the book reports we typically do every day, all this stuff and more. It's all there at ThomHartmann.com. So check it out and sign up for our newsletter. I think you'll really enjoy it and appreciate it and find a lot of value there. We put a lot of work into this stuff. And you'll find it all right there on our website at ThomHartmann.com. And be sure to check out the newsletter and sign up for it. It's great. Today we're reading from the brand new third edition, the 2018 edition of The Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight by me, the subtitle of Fate of the World and What We Can Do Before It's Too Late. This is from the chapter Climate Changes, which I did a huge update on over the last couple of years. Imagine you and your family had a time machine large enough to live in no matter what era you arrived in. Let's imagine that you dial your time machine back to 250 million years ago when you step out onto a fern-covered field somewhere thousands of miles away from what is today Siberia. Unbeknownst to you, the lava flow has begun in the distance. As you're setting up your new home, you might notice a reddening of the sky at sunrise and sunset, but it wouldn't seem like anything dramatic was going on anywhere in the environment. Over the next few years and decades, you may notice that the weather is growing more intense, the seasonal extremes more noticeable. Still, you'd have no way of knowing that the planet was moving toward a point that would lead to the death of almost everything. Over the years, as you become an old man or woman, your children might notice that the larger plants, what today would be our trees, seem to be dying faster than normal from what appears to be some sort of blight or fungus. It's as if the plant's immune systems have been compromised. Long after you're dead, your grandchildren might begin to notice that the rains are not coming the way they used to, and when they do, the storms are wildly more ferocious. The results are either floods or droughts. Insects and small animal populations are less evident. The air is becoming corrosive. It's getting harder to breathe. The sunrises and sunsets are becoming more spectacular with radiant colors of light cast across the sky. By the time your great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren are born, the lava flows may be settling down. But the tipping point has been passed. Although it was a slow process, it was an inexorable one. The world, over thousands of years, has warmed to the degree where all of the abundant life your descendants could see around themselves was doomed. The lava flow in Siberia, by throwing into the atmosphere a variety of greenhouse gases, had been steadily pushing up the temperature of the Earth. While many of these gases were themselves toxic, it would be their combined greenhouse effects, along with those of the multiplying carbon dioxide levels, that would take down the planet. But you would only know that in retrospect, when pretty much everything was dead. Fast forward to today. The climate scientists' warnings have come true. There is more carbon in the atmosphere trapping heat and moisture than ever before in the 165,000 years of human history. We're on the verge of the first ice-free summer in the Arctic in 3 million years. And back then, the Earth was a much different place from the one currently cradling us, or even the one in which modern humans evolved. The consequences of a warming planet are appearing much faster than had been projected by climate scientists of just a decade ago. The most dire warnings, rising oceans, freak storms, agricultural collapse, they're all taking place now. One recent July afternoon, we had an electrical storm here in central Vermont that was so severe it took out 2 of my computers and blew circuit breakers throughout the house. Our home wasn't unique. Many families lost most or all of their electrical appliances. Larry, a fellow we'd hired to do some repair work on our half-mile-long driveway, stood atop a hill with me a week after the storm and told me how his wife had been thrown across the room from an electrical shock she received touching their screen door during the storm. It's not normal weather here, he said. It used to be the Vermont weather was famous for always changing, always unpredictable, but the last few years have been like nothing before. A lot of people agree with Larry. Extreme weather events like the 14-year drought that savaged Australia starting in 1995 and the freezing destruction of Superstorm Sandy are on the rise. Between 2011 and 2013, the U.S. suffered 32 extreme weather events, each wreaking at least $1 billion in damage. 2012, the year of Superstorm Sandy, was the second costliest year on record, with $110 billion in damages. During the 2017 hurricane season, Hurricane Harvey appeared and quickly developed into a 1,000-year event, dumping 20 inches of rain over nearly 29,000 square miles surrounding the Houston metropolitan area, flooding an area the size of New Jersey. Rebuilding from Hurricane Harvey alone could cost up to $180 billion in damages, making it the costliest storm in U.S. history. But how long until the next superstorm? The year 2016 set new records as the hottest year in recorded history, with average global temperatures of 1.3 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Along with the heat waves, flooding and drought accompanying this temperature increase are melting polar ice caps and, in turn, rising sea levels. The planet's sea level has risen an average of 8 inches since 1880, with dramatic gains in the last half of the 20th century. In the 50 years since 1963, the ocean rose 2.5 inches in Los Angeles, 6 inches in Boston, and 12.5 inches in Galveston, Texas. The polar ice caps are in an unprecedented state of decline, with sea ice in Antarctica and the Arctic measuring at 1.48 million square miles less than the average 1981 through 2010 average. At the end of 2016, the Arctic saw temperatures 36 degrees Fahrenheit above average. When the mathematics and physics become as compelling as they are now, big business gets alarmed. In November of 2012, the international accounting firm PricewaterhouseCoopers issued a rather dire warning for the future of business on the planet. After all, if the human race has been reduced to living in caves or is extinct, nobody's going to buy or sell anything. In a news release sent out internationally entitled "Business as Usual is Not an Option," as current rates of emission reduction point to 2 degrees of warming, Jonathan Grant, Director of Sustainability and Climate Change, said this: "The new reality is a much more challenging future in terms of planning, financing, and predictability. Even doubling our current annual rates of decarbonization globally every year to 2050 would still lead to 6 degrees Celsius, making governments' ambitions to limit warming to 2 degrees appear highly unrealistic." The Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight by Thom Hartmann.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hello, everybody. I'm Jeff. Today I decided to wear a tie. For those of you in Radio Land, you might be able to hear the tie, but you might not be able to see it. Let's start right now with this word from President Gerald Ford. Do we have Gerald Ford ready?
My fellow Americans, our long national nightmare is over. Our Constitution works. Our great republic is a government of laws and not of men. Here, the people rule.
Our long national nightmare is over. Except that it's not. And except that it wasn't. And our reliance, our collective national exhale as a country, our feeling that, oh, good, now everything is over because Nixon has resigned. And then Nixon had been pardoned. And therefore, there was nothing else to be scared of. But let's think about what happened in 1973, 1974, and shortly thereafter. Bartlett became the editorial page editor of the Wall Street Journal. Ended up turning that paper in a direction that ended up with him earning the distinction as the most influential editorial page editor of his time. Phyllis Schlafly blocked passage of the Equal Rights Amendment. Conservative Political Action Committee, you might have heard of that, CPAC. It has the conferences every year. It was founded. The Heritage Foundation was founded. National Right to Life, founded 1974. Focus on the Family, founded 1977. 1978 was Proposition 13 and the modern anti-tax, anti-public services movement. The end of the Nixon administration was not the end of the conservative movement. The end of the Nixon administration was not a dawn of greater transparency. It was not a dawn of addressing climate change. It was not a flourishing of democracy. It was not an emboldening of the people who've been fighting for civil rights and for voting rights. It was not a flourishing going forward of the middle class. In fact, starting in 1980 was when the burgeoning middle class, which had been growing since World War II, started to shrink. Our long national nightmare was not over then. It is not over now. It wouldn't have been over even if Bill Barr had issued a different report, even if what amounts to what Bill Safire called the cover-up general, if he had done something very differently. It wouldn't have been over. And it's not over now. So how do we react to that? Well, I've been saying personally that we shouldn't be putting all of our faith in existing institutions. We have to transform institutions. We have to build new institutions. We have to work at grassroots. We have to work at local level. We have to not neglect presidential politics or congressional politics. We have to not neglect what's happening in large existing institutions and how those can be used in pro-democracy fashion. We got to do those things. But we have to not think that the machine of power right now is moving in the direction of the people's interest. We can't just assume that. We have to move it. We have to build new gears and make sure that the gears of government are in fact working in the direction of the people's interest. Yesterday we used the word zugzwang. It is a chess term when you force your opponent into a move they don't want to make. And I used some examples of zugzwang. Here's another one. The move by the right wing to say government is bad, leading people to say, well, therefore we must say government is good. Taxes are bad as well, therefore taxes are good. No. Government and taxes are necessary. It is our job to make them better rather than worse. It is our job to make government better rather than worse. Government's a tool. Public services are a tool. How do we make sure those tools are used to the benefit of people rather than subjugation of people? And if we can avoid a simplistic, binary understanding of what's happening in the country, if we can think about first principle, if we can think about what is most important, how do we make people's lives a little bit better rather than a lot worse, then we can stay focused. If we can recognize that there's not a single president that will save us, there's not a single Congress that will save us, but that we are those we have been waiting for, that we have to build communities and build movements and build new ownership structures and build new institutions and build new organizations and build new media, that we have to support the good stuff that exists. We have to try to transform the mediocre or bad stuff that exists. We have to get rid of the really bad stuff that exists if we possibly can. We have to think of ourselves as agents, as people who have agency, as workers, as participants, not as viewers merely, not as listeners merely, not as audience merely, not as a target demographic merely. And we have to be vigilant. Stockdale paradox. A couple people said, thank you for that. Somebody said, remind me what that is. Very quick version, Admiral John Stockdale, American hero, before he was vice presidential candidate to Ross Perot, before Saturday Night Live made fun of him, and described the people who made it out of the Hanoi Hilton, people who made it out of prison camps, and they were the people who were neither too optimistic nor too pessimistic, or more accurately, the people who didn't just assume everything was fine, but also the people who did not assume they were doomed. They were the people who were brutally honest about the critical facts facing the situation and ultimately confident that they had to work to be successful eventually. We need to embrace that Stockdale paradox if we're going to get out of this prison camp. And we've got to celebrate the good stuff. Today is Thursday. What's good? Earlier this week, said on Thursday, we would take your calls on good stuff that's happening out there, on ways that people can be involved. I made a list of 10. I'll be sharing my 10 today of things that you can do if we are agents, if we are workers, if we are participants, if we are not merely viewers, if we are not merely a target market, if we are human beings who are in this together. What can we do? What can you do? What are you doing that you want to thank you for, that you deserve a thank you for, or something you saw somebody else do? What are little bills that are happening in your legislature that could be big bills? What's something happening in Congress you want to praise? What's something you're doing in your community or somebody else is doing in your community that could actually do something that's a wish that could beget more wishes, that actually could do something to impact the power structure?
1 minute.
To make it more pro-democracy, make it a little bit better rather than a lot worse. Because we are not merely dreaming. And that when this stuff that we don't trust happens and we want to go to sleep, I can understand it. That is how totalitarian regimes have been successful in the past. If we are going to make sure that we don't have an arc of history that bends towards a totalitarian regime, regardless of our politics in terms of many issues, including our religion, we have to make sure we don't go to sleep, that we aren't dreamers. So what's the good news? What's good out there? It's Thank You Thursday. What do you want to say thank you for? What are you engaging in? What are other people engaging in that you want to give a shout out to? Or what's an idea you have that someone could pile on to that help out, that could actually win, that could actually have some impact, that could be related to the big, big values, the big, big important stuff, even if it's working at a hyper-local level? What are the little things we can do that are about the bigger things? We're going to be taking your calls at 202-808-9925. It's 202-808-9925. I wore a tie today because it's serious. It's serious on Thank You Thursday. We love you. We'll be back in a sec.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program. Mark from Valley, Washington, you're on the air, sir, and on Free Speech TV.
Good morning, Jefferson. I called before you set your premise, so my call's not going to exactly match.
That's all right. Do your thing.
Here's the thing. You said you were quoting Ford with our great national nightmare. I think it began after Watergate, didn't end. Because that's when the conservatives consolidated.
Exactly.
That's when the Koch brothers decided to pour all their money into the elections. And with the court appointments that have gone through and the ones that are going to go through before we get this evil person out of office, I hate to say that I think our great national nightmare is only going to get worse before it ever gets better.
So much of our faith, so much of our analysis, and by our I mean the sort of zeitgeist, the collective understanding, is thinking that we are in a world that we used to be in, and even then misunderstanding that world. And I couldn't agree with you more on the Nixon point. That was the dawn, not the sunset. It was the beginning, not the end. And thank you for your call, Mark. Anything you want to shout out that you're looking forward to, that you're working on, or that somebody else is working on, you want to give a little light to?
I've just been getting involved with the local Democratic Party because I don't see anything else. I'm not a hardcore Democrat, but I'm certainly not a Republican, and you really don't have much choice.
Understand the political parties are vessels, right? I mean, the Democratic Party was a party that was strongly in favor of slavery before it became the party that was standing up for civil rights. The political parties in a first-past-the-post system are vessels. If we can put good people into those vessels, whichever vessels they are, we can make the world a little bit better and a lot worse. Mark, thank you so much.
Have a good one.
Paul from Lucerne, California, go ahead.
Hey, first of all, I'd like to thank you. You're an awesome fill-in host for Tom.
Thanks,
I really
man.
like your silver lining approach. That is awesome.
Appreciate that.
Oh, no problem. You're welcome. Now, the silver lining in Trump is I'm in the local Democratic Party.
Yeah.
all right? And it's twice the size as it was when I first joined. Lots of people are getting active. How do you think we got AOC?
Yep.
The local Democratic Party put her on the ticket, and then she got the run. So if you don't like the way the Democrats are operating and you don't like who they're standing up in your precinct for you to stand up, join your party. Make the argument, no, we don't want to vote for this guy. No, we want this person over here. She speaks to our values. She's more, in line with us. This guy's just the incumbent. Who cares?
Yeah.
And that's what they did over there at AOC. She picked a 10-term incumbent's butt. All right? And
there can be
able to do that.
And there. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry.
No, there's several things I could say to respond. First of all, thanks for the call, and what I just said was the political parties are vessels in a two-party system. I think that's a useful way to think about it. And how do we inject those vessels with as many white blood cells as possible? And I don't mean racially. In fact, sometimes I mean the opposite of that. But how do we have as many antibodies, sort of pro-health, pro-democracy forces into our institutions? Anything in particular? Maybe it was AOC. Anything else that's giving you a little hope, or that you want to shout out or give encouragement or light to?
I really like the fact that all the people that are joining our party and bringing different points of view to our party, and I like the fact that young people are joining the party. We have high school kids in our party now.
In Oregon right now, there is a bill that the governor just said that she would support, put on by the Bus Project, Hat Tib, the Bus Project, which begat the Young Voter Alliance, to lower the voting age to 16. We might be talking about that as another thing in a little bit. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. We'll be right back. In fact, we're going to stick with you. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Jeff. I'm wearing a tie today, and it's Thank You Thursday. That is not to disregard the national nightmare. It, in fact, is so that we engage within it. So there are moments of joy, and recognize that if either we go to sleep or merely cry, if the only thing we have is brutal honesty with the facts facing us, we might, in fact, avoid even that. That we also have to embrace our commitment to make things a little bit better. And we're taking your calls, particularly on things that you want to shout out for, things you're engaged in, ways that people can make an impact. We've had calls this week about, well, what the heck do we do? And decided we wanted to spend a show talking about, here's some things we can do. I made a list of some things, also want to hear your list. Here is Greg, KBCCS, excuse me. I always want to call it the BCC. I want to call it the thing that will help me decide who the national champion is, but it has nothing to do with that. KBCS from Tum, Washington. Hello, Greg.
Hi, Jeff. Thank you so much for this. What I'm doing to help out our cause in global climate change and everything is I'm doing a few things. One is I've changed my bank over to a bank called Aspiration.
Yep.
And it's a green bank. They do not put any money into the fossil fuel industry. It's a very worthwhile. And then also I'm investing in hydrogen. And if anybody doesn't know about hydrogen and fuel cells, a real good website to go to is called Fuel Cells Works. And every day they come out with at least 3 or 4, sometimes 5 or 6 articles of what different companies around the world and different countries, Japan, South Korea, and whatnot, are doing in the way of funding hydrogen. And if people don't know it, hydrogen is the fuel of the future. It's 100% green. You can make it with electrolysis. You could set up solar panels out in the middle of the desert and have a hydrogen fuel station.
You there?
Pence saying that how he wants to go to the moon in 5 years. We could put a hydrogen fueling station in every single city in America. So
I appreciate it, and I appreciate the You offered two. In fact, one of them was on my list in a general way. That is voting with our dollars. That is, and you said in two different ways. You're doing that in terms of your purchasing, or what you've purchased in terms of your banking choice. Banking with an organization. Geez, I need to do that too. Banking with an organization that is more in alignment with your values. And the other is putting your investment dollars and for those, putting your investment dollars into something that comports with your values. For people on the show who have the ability to do that, that is another good one, and appreciate it. Let's hear from Kim from Portland, Oregon. Hey, I've been to Portland.
Hey, Jeff, how are you doing?
I'm well. How you doing, Kim?
Good, thank you. So I'm calling in response to you putting out there what are you doing that people can help with, that people can pile on to? Yeah. So I do need some help. I am getting ready to launch the Brainchild Adoption Center, which will be a place where people can find 10 new businesses that have jobs that cannot be outsourced or automated. Because between now and 2025, the predictions are that about half of our jobs are going to be lost due to automation, and then we have all these retail chains going under too. So the Brainchild Adoption Center, I'm doing it as a free speech endeavor, so I'm not owning it, I'm not charging for it, and I am making it the place of locally grown prosperity.
Well, that's great. How can people find out more about it, Kim?
Okay, well, the website isn't ready yet, and that's actually something I need help with. But if anyone's interested in learning more, they can email me at WannaLove, BAC, that's JUANA, love at BAC. I'm doing it under the pseudonym WannaLove. And I'll give you
one little thing. Something else that's going to launch pretty soon is a new podcast called Better Money, trying to help people think through impact investment, startup choices that are in alignment with their values. Noel Brown, I'm actually helping out with that, and that's going to be launching here pretty soon. And and when that gets going, that's the kind of thing that might be up your alley and might even be a chance to plug what you're doing.
That'd be beautiful. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you so much. We're a different Jeff from Arizona. Jeff, how you doing?
I'm doing okay. How are you?
You know what? Today, I'll tell you, there's so many corny things. I mean, you asked the question, so I'm going to pretend you meant it. And I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, yes, indeed.
So there's so many corny things we learned when we were kids, right? It's like, well, if you smile, it'll make you happier. If you turn your frown upside down. And I realized I woke up this morning grumpy. And I weep for the state of our democracy. But I said, you know what? I don't want to just spread my grumpiness. What's that going to do? I should be brutally honest about what's going on as best I can, but I shouldn't just spread my grumpiness. And so I wrote, what I wanted to say to start out. And right now, I'm feeling great, Jeff. I hope you're feeling great too. What is making you feel great, or what are you working on?
Well, every Thursday, we celebrate what we call the Evening of Mushkil Gusha, the remover of all difficulties. And this comes from a tradition of teaching stories from the Middle East, Persia in particular. I believe Mushkil Gusha, translated from Persian, is remover of difficulties. So I have a radio program every Thursday night on a low-power FM station in Patagonia, Arizona.
Shout out to LPFMs out there.
KPUP and KPUP-LP, and it streams online at kpup.rocks.
Yeah.
And so every Thursday night we celebrate the evening of Mushkil Gusha, the remover of all difficulties, and we read a story.
And how do I spell that? How do I spell that so when I say it, I'm not inadvertently poking fun?
Mushkil Gusha.
Yeah.
M-U-S-H-A. Excuse me. M-U-S-H-K-I-L. First word. Gusha, G-U-S-H-A. And you can look it up online.
I'll check it out. That's them sending us to break. Mushkil Gusha, you celebrate every Thursday night. Heck, it's Thursday night tonight, and you're going to be celebrating tonight.
Correct. The remover of all difficulties.
The remover of all difficulties. It'd be nice to remove some difficulties. We'll be right back. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jeff.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Right after this break, I'm going to be sharing a couple of my strategic suggestions and thank yous of things that are happening out there. This is Thom Show. I'm Jeff.
Our book today is Midnight in Chernobyl, The Untold Story of the World's Greatest Nuclear Disaster by Adam Higginbotham. This is from the prologue. Saturday, April 26, 1986, 4:16 p.m., Chernobyl Atomic Energy Station, Ukraine. Senior Lieutenant Alexander Logachev loved radiation the way other men love their wives. Tall and good-looking, 26 years old, with close-cropped dark hair and ice blue eyes, Logachev had joined the Soviet Army when he was still a boy. They had trained him well. The instructors from the military academy outside Moscow taught him with lethal poisons and unshielded radiation. He traveled to the testing grounds of Semipalatinsk in Kazakhstan and to the desolate East Urals trace, where the fallout from a clandestine radioactive accident still poisoned the landscape. Eventually, Logachev's training took him even to the remote and forbidden islands of Novaya Zemlya, high in the Arctic Circle, and ground zero for the detonation of the terrible Tsar Bomba, the largest thermonuclear device in history. Now, as the lead radiation reconnaissance officer of the 427th Red Banner Mechanized Regiment of the Kiev District Civil Defense Force, Logachev knew how to protect himself and his three-man crew from nerve agents, biological weapons, gamma rays, and hot particles, by doing their work just as the textbooks dictated, by trusting his dosimetry equipment, and, when necessary, reaching for the nuclear, bacterial, and chemical warfare medical kits stored in the cockpit of their armored car. But he also believed that the best protection was psychological. These men who allowed themselves to fear radiation were most at risk. But those who came to love and appreciate its spectral presence, to understand its caprices, could endure even the most intense gamma bombardment and emerge as healthy as before. As he sped through the suburbs of Kiev that morning at the head of a column of more than 30 vehicles summoned to an emergency at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, Logachev had every reason to feel confident. The spring air blowing through the hatches of his armored scout car carried the smell of the trees and the freshly cut grass. His men, gathered on the parade ground just the night before for their monthly inspection, were drilled and ready. At his feet, a battery of radiological detection instruments, including a newly installed electronic device twice as sensitive as the old model, murmured softly, revealing nothing unusual in the atmosphere around them. But as they finally approached the plant later that morning, it became clear that something extraordinary had happened. The alarm on the radiation dosimeter first sounded as they passed the concrete signpost marking the perimeter of the power station grounds, and the lieutenant gave orders to stop the vehicle and log their findings. 51 roentgens per hour. If they waited here just 60 minutes, they would all absorb the maximum dose of radiation permitted Soviet troops during wartime. They drove on, following the line of high-voltage transmission towers that marched toward the horizon in the direction of the power plant. Their readings climbed still further before falling again. Then, as the armored car rumbled along the concrete bank of the station's cooling canal, the outline of the fourth unit of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant finally became visible, and Logachev and his crew gazed at it in silence. The roof of the 20-story building had been torn open, its other upper levels blackened and collapsed into heaps of rubble. They could see shattered panels of ferroconcrete, tumbled blocks of graphite, and here and there the glittering metal casings of fuel assemblies from the core of a nuclear reactor. A cloud of steam drifted from the wreckage into the sunlit sky. Yet they had orders to conduct a full reconnaissance of the plant. Their armored car crawled counterclockwise around the complex at 10 kilometers an hour. Sergeant Vlaskin called out the radiation readings from the new instruments, and Logachev scribbled them down on a map, hand-drawn on a sheet of parchment paper in ballpoint pen and colored marker. 1 roentgen per hour, then 2, then 3. They turned left and the figures began to rise quickly. 10, 30, 50, 100. 250 roentgens an hour, the sergeant shouted, his eyes widening. Comrade Lieutenant, he began, and pointed at the radiometer. Logachev looked down at the digital readout and felt his scalp prickle with terror. 2,080 roentgens an hour, an impossible number. Logachev struggled to remain calm and remember the textbook, to conquer his fear. But his training failed him, and the lieutenant heard himself screaming in panic at the driver, petrified that the vehicle would stall. Why are you going this way, you son of a bee? Are you out of your effing mind? If this thing dies, we'll all be corpses in 15 minutes. Part 1, Chapter 1, The Soviet Prometheus. At the slow beat of approaching rotor blades, blackbirds rose into the sky, scattering over the frozen meadows and the pearly knots of creeks and ponds, lacing the Pripyat River basin. Far below, standing knee-deep in snow, his breath lingering in heavy clouds, Viktor Brukhanov awaited the arrival of the nomenklatura from Moscow. When the helicopter touched down, the delegation of ministers and Communist Party officials trudged together over the icy field. The savage cold gnawed at their heavy woolen coats and nipped beneath their tall fur hats. The head of the Ministry of Energy and Electrification of the USSR and senior party bosses from the Soviet Socialist Republic of Ukraine joined Brukhanov at the spot where their audacious new project was to begin. Just 34 years old, clever and ambitious, a dedicated party man, Brukhanov had come to western Ukraine with orders to begin building what would become the greatest nuclear power station on Earth. Midnight at Chernobyl.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
It's Thank You Thursday. What are the things happening out there that you want to offer as solutions, stuff that people can do? We can tweet, we can call in, we can talk to our neighbors. Earlier on, we got Greg's advice, or what he's doing, I'll call it advice, which is to invest your dollars in things that are germane or at least in some degree of alignment with your values, whether that's your retirement fund, whether that's taking a few bucks every month, every week, every paycheck, paying yourself first, trying to remember that lesson. Also, how you spend your dollars, what bank you put it in. I'm realizing that's something that I got to do a little better at. What else? What are other things that you work on? Here is Ed from Riverside, California. Go ahead, Ed.
Hi, Tom. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. I take it as a compliment.
I'm grateful I live in California because we don't have voter registration interference out here.
Yeah.
But I have lived up and down the East Coast, and I've seen it back there. I wrote a letter to my senators and my congressmen, and I asked them, since when we register to vote, how come that's not protected under our papers? How come some bureaucrat can just go and say, oh, well, you don't have the right to vote here anymore? Under the First Amendment, we have the freedom of speech, right?
Yep.
But our only voice we have to tell our government who we want to represent us is through our vote.
Yep.
Why isn't that protected under the Constitution?
It's a good question. And and it is protected under the Constitution if there is a 14th Amendment equal protection infringement upon the right to vote. But characterizing the right to vote as a fundamental right is something that a better Supreme Court would do. And it's one of the reasons why I have made the case that the progressives have under-prioritized the court. Donald Trump got put in office. The Christian coalition stuck with him. The folks stuck with him in significant part because they understood the primacy of the courts, how important they are. Primacy is the wrong word because they don't come first. In fact, it's the ultimacy. It's the fact that they come last. I wanted to remind about the Lochner era. This is one of the things I wanted to make sure we covered this week. Lochner era was based on the Lochner case is why the era got its name, but a time when the Due Process Clause was used to invalidate congressional actions that limited corporate power. And it was a dark time in American history. It was a dark time that coincided with the Great Depression, that coincided with the biggest wealth disparities in history, that coincided with the time in history that I think is most similar in many respects to the time we're in right now. In the Lochner era, they'd figured out, if we just get the courts to invalidate whatever democracy does, then we don't have to worry about democracy too much. This is why FDR tried to enlarge the court, was in fact so that the ultimacy, the last word, was something that was pro-democracy rather than anti-democracy. That's why there has been such a big effort to dominate the courts. If we had prioritized courts more, and if we do going forward, and I think about in time spans of decades, not just election cycles, but we need courts who recognize the fundamental right nature of the right to vote, identify it as a fundamental right. So when it is infringed, you've got to have a really high standard upon which you have to clear a really high bar in order not to be guilty of unconstitutional action. Appreciate the call. I'll give you a couple of mine. A couple things that you can do. If you're wondering, well, what can I do? Like, these are things you can do. If you live in a blue state, and that's not everybody who listens to our show, thank goodness, but if you live in a blue state, here's something you could do at the statewide level. You actually could push for automatic voter registration at a statewide level. That started in Oregon. It's now happened. Shout out again to the Bus Project. That has happened now in multiple states around the country. You can do that in lots of blue states, particularly as a blue trifecta. I wish it would happen in purple states and red states. Everybody, we should care about everybody voting. We should have a robust argument about what we believe. But it is easier to get done because right now, unfortunately, the battle lines are really almost pro-democracy and anti-democracy in too many ways. Push for automatic voter registration. That's something that can get done at the state level. If you live in a blue city, which most cities are, even in many, many, many red states. And again, I wish it the kind of thing we can do in more red cities. I wish it were something we could do in red and purple states. But public finance of elections, that's something that is just happened in Portland, Oregon. It has happened in New York City. You go to your city, it's something that could happen in mid-sized cities. You live in a college town or near a college town, go to them and say, hey, we should make sure that you don't have to be bought and paid for to serve. That you don't just have to be a phenom, as Time Magazine described Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. You don't have to just be a phenom in order to win based on small dollar elections. That we can have public financing. And all of a sudden you do that, and then the resource that would have been spent on that can go to statewide races, go to congressional races, et cetera. It's one of the most strategic moves we can make. Those are just a couple of them. Let's go to Laura from WCPT Ain't Afraid of Me in Chicago, Illinois. Hello, Laura.
Hey, hi. My name's Dr. Laura Chamberlain, and I'm
Dr.
with
Chamberlain,
an election
hello.
integrity. Hi, how are you doing? And I'm with an election integrity group in Chicago in suburban Cook County called Clean Count Cook County. And we do these things all the time. We work on all of these issues. We did pass in Illinois automatic voter registration. But there's so many aspects of our elections that need to be cleaned up. And I'm just calling to encourage people. You can start an election integrity group in your county, or find an election integrity group. There's many counties that have them, and start working with them on all of these issues. There's automatic voter registration. There's cleaning up the electronic voting machines, right?
Yep.
These the vendor-owned and operated, electronic voting machines. We know that this is an issue, right? Because Ivanka Trump is, building voting machines in China. So,
Ivanka Trump is building voting machines in China. That seems like that story should have blinking lights around it, but keep going.
Exactly. So there's so many issues around our elections.
Yep.
In Chicago, we're having this runoff election for the mayor and for a few aldermanic wards. And we train poll watchers to get out and make sure that the laws are being applied fairly. We are doing so many things all of the time. We advocate for state laws. We advocate.
And how'd y'all get started? What was the first? How long has it been going on? And for people who are thinking, do I need to find something like this that might exist, or I need to start my own? What was if you permit me, what was the first little nugget that got you cracking?
Right. Okay, definitely. So the stolen election in 2000, Bush v. Gore, got us all awake and alert. And then a group started Illinois Ballot Integrity Project, and they are still operating in some of the counties in Illinois, Kane and DuPage and McHenry, and we're trying to grow our election integrity groups. We all talk to each other. We all try to work with each other. And so you can look and see if there's already a group in your county, okay, and join that group. If there's not, you can go to Clean Count Cook County and .org, cleancouncookcounty.org. And I have a video right up on the front page talking about the ways that you can come up on these issues really, really quickly.
That's
and,
great. Plug the website. Plug the website again. I want to get to the next call. Plug the website again, Dr. Laura. And by the way, you're my favorite Dr. Laura.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm the progressive one. So, yes, cleancouncookcounty.org. Yeah, come on in. Everybody come on in.
Thank you so much, Dr. Laura. Let's go to David from Columbus, Ohio, who helped establish a neighborhood association. Go ahead, David.
Hi. Excuse me. Hi. I like your topic. One thing I felt was very important was local action and establishing more democracy based on a group working to promote neighborhood planning strategies, working to solve neighborhood problems, looking at what we have that's good and how we can solve that, and or not solve it, but keep it, and looking at what we don't like and how we can solve those problems, and then presenting that to council or whoever. You have much more power as a neighborhood group, and working together, you can gain all this information and intelligence from the local community. There's a lot of people that are, very smart, and they all work together, and then you end up with a group that may not be exactly what you want, and we're not overthrowing the Republicans or anything, but we're doing things that help our community.
Give an example, but before I go to the next caller, give an example of something you're most proud of that the neighborhood association y'all established has been able to grapple with.
Well, right now we're working on historic preservation. I wrote a historic preservation inventory analysis looking at why the community, it's an older community, it was established at the turn of the century, why it should be preserved and why it's valuable, and how it serves the community and how it's walkable and how it serves all these planning strategies that, are important.
That's great. Thank you so much for that. The working at the local level, establishing new community or connecting community that exists, it's a big part of it. Because so much of the political argument is entertainment, and so much of news is about picking fights. We think that what really is going on is merely a power struggle. Ultimately, what we have to be doing is serving people. And so if you can be doing something in your community that actually serves people, that directly serves them, and then make sure that that is not entirely cordoned off from democracy. Recognize that we don't just need to put our names on a couple of hospital wings. We need to invest in hospital transformation for everybody. As long as we do both those things, we're on the right track. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jeff. It's Thank You Thursday.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
The call-in number is 202-808-9925. What are you doing, or what do you suggest someone else do to make an impact? Callie from KPFK, from South Pasadena, California. Callie, if you don't mind me asking, where in South Pasadena do you live? After my folks divorced, I lived in South Pasadena, California for over a decade. Callie, are you there, or are you just trolling me?
Oh, no, I'm there. Can you hear me?
I can. Where inside? I attended Marengo, and I attended Oneonta before Oneonta closed, and I even attended South Pass Junior High for a brief period. So I know your town. Where in South Pass? You don't have to give me your address, but where in South Pass do you live?
You know the Raymond Hill area?
Sure.
That's where I live.
Well, thanks for calling. Speak your piece.
Thank you so much. I'm so thrilled that I actually got through. So I wanted to say that I have sort of taken it upon myself to be my personal project to convince everybody I know that this notion that we are a more divided people than we have ever been in this country before is, in fact, a mindless, media-created mantra that is rapidly becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. I don't believe it's true. In other words, I don't think we are more divided than we've ever been. I don't say that we're not divided. I don't say that the divisions are, serious and critical. I believe that they absolutely are. But if you think about, the people that populate, I want to say fascist movement, but I'm thinking of the white supremacist movement and that ilk. They have always been with us. And they are everywhere around the world. And I don't mean necessarily codified into fascism and white supremacy, but that way of thinking has always been a part of us as a human species right from the get. So I think what's happened now is they've gotten a mouthpiece in Trump and many of his mouthpieces as well, and the Fox News, of course. And so they get a lot more attention than they've ever got, and maybe they are more organized, and maybe they're getting funds, and they're, creating some activism that they didn't have before. But I don't think it's new, and I don't think it's different. And what I think happens is that we now, I listen to my friends, so this is just basically from a grassroots observation that I've made. My friends who are all politically concerned and politically active and paying attention, they're all saying, well, we're more divided than we've ever been. And they kind of like throw their hands up at that point. So my battle is, on a personal level, is to convince us that we really aren't. I've got some really close friends who I really adore and love, can't stand their politics.
Right.
And I can't really talk to them.
And so where do you go? Because I think one of the challenging conundra, all right, and I'll probably say this again when we get a little bit later in the show, but we now know that, first I'll just parrot what you said. There are entities that exist to divide us, and the power can be gained from dividing us. And we see that when Donald Trump hosts a rally, there's a study that showed that in the states where he did, in the counties where he did that, you called it fascist, but white supremacist violence goes up by 228%. All right. So it's a movement built on trying to divide us. And the trick is, how do we avoid just stoking division while at the same time not just finding a false middle or merely normalizing behavior or being anti-democratic ourselves? Callie, thank you so much for calling. That sound means we're going to break, but appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
We'll be right back. It's Thank You Thursday. I'm Jeff. What's good out there? What are you doing that's good? What are other people doing that's good? Call in. We'll talk to you. Hey, everybody. As I said, it is Thank You Thursday. What's good out there? What are the things that you're doing, their community is doing that's good? What's something that someone can get engaged in where they might actually be able to put a nick in the universe? They might actually be able to hop on top of the arc of history to bend it a little bit more towards justice. And what are you up to? We're going to take Jason from Portland, Oregon. Jason Kafori. Hello, sir.
Hi, how are you?
So what's cracking? What are you working on you want to plug?
So out here in Oregon, we are one of 5 states that have no limits at all on political contributions. So we just had a race for governor, broke all the records, almost 40 million raised, and 3.5 of it came from one individual, Phil Knight, the billionaire from Nike. So we have been working tirelessly, both here in the city of Portland and Multnomah County over the last few years, to put limits on individual contributions, figure out a way for small donors to still have a larger impact at nonprofits and labor groups, and also disclosures, figuring out how we identify who is the big money coming in from the dark side, the dark money. And so we passed a couple measures here by overwhelming majorities, 89%, 87.5% at the city and the county. And now we're taking the fight statewide. We just passed a constitutional referral out of the Senate Finance Reform Committee down in Salem yesterday that we're really, really excited about. It's now going over to the Senate Rules Committee.
So there's actually a chance. You got a chance to pass this thing, or at least refer it out to voters.
Yeah, no, we got a great shot. And, we've totally changed the local narrative here now. The Oregonian, which for 20 years was not. I know.
And I should offer some disclosure. I know, Jason, I've been involved in this as well, and honored to be so, and really appreciate your call. But yeah, people don't know our Oregonian newspaper, our big newspaper. It has not necessarily been an ally in the push against money in politics, but now it seems like things have changed.
It totally changed. They wrote, spent 18 months working on this project, put several reporters on it, all about the corrupting influence of money in politics. Huge 4-part series. And then they just did an editorial last weekend where they told the legislature, refer something to the voters so that we can put limits on big money. The world has shifted in the last 20 years, and in a lot of states out there, billionaires just come in and put big money up, buy courts, buy judges. We haven't had that happen yet in Oregon, but we're thinking down the road here. We're trying to put a really healthy political system, hopefully include both limits on contributions, disclosures to stop the dark money, because unfortunately with Citizens United, you can still give unlimited money. You can't really stop that.
Yep.
All you can do is try to have them identify, who's giving the dark money, which I think is going to scare off some of the people that don't want their name out there attached to some of this dark money. And
that's why it's dark. That's why it's secret. It's because they want to keep it secret.
Exactly. And, I think the healthiest system would also have some sort of public funding, which would allow, candidates to go and do a grassroots effort. There's various models around the country.
Jason, before I go to the next call, where can people find out more, either because they're among our Portland or our Oregonian listeners, or because they want to learn from this so they can do something either on the limit side or on the disclosure side or on the public finance side in their own town? Where's a good resource?
Well, locally here in Oregon, if you'd like to follow what we're doing, honestelections.org.
Great.
Honestelections.org.
Great.
Nationally, groups like Common Cause have been fighting the good fight for a long time. The PERG system, OSPERG here in Oregon, has been fighting the good fight. There are the guy who was going to run for president. I can't remember his name. Was Larry? What was it? A couple of years
Larry
back.
Lessing. Larry Lessing's a good resource. Also plug the Brennan Center. But Jason, thank you so much for that work, and thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, we're going to keep the fight out here. Let's stay in touch about it, and let's hopefully win this one.
Appreciate it. Okay. I'll offer one additional fact, and again, that was Jason Kafoury from Honest Elections out in Oregon, is that Oregon had been known for its environmental legacy, and there was a series of stories that actually were probably prodded as much by the local activism work as much as they prodded the activism work. The activists were actually ahead of the publication of the story by a couple of years. But the story laid out that Oregon was losing its environmental legacy, that we were doing more highway expansions, doing less protection of air and water, starting to erode a little bit our system of land use. And that was and then demonstrated a link between that and the fact that Oregon has among the most expensive elections in the country. Blue state, but again, parties are vessels. They are infused with power. They are infused either with more or less virtue. They will be better or worse depending on what we do. Let's take another call. Let's go to Jeff from Huntington Beach, California. A different Jeff. Change makers for KPFK. We're big fans of KPFK. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, hi, Jeff. I just wanted to alert Southern California listeners in KPFK that I'm working with the management at KPFK to put together an interview program, a 30-minute program, which will feature grassroots leadership.
Awesome.
Creating community service projects that the community is supporting and can be replicated.
Where can people find out more?
Okay.
Just plug a website real quick.
Yeah, the show is due to hit the airwaves sometime in late spring.
Great.
So they can listen for it, or if they know change makers and they want them featured on the program, they can email me at kpfkchangemakers@gmail.com.
kpfkchangemakers@gmail.com. Thank you so much. And this is the thing. If the only thing we do is express anger, and anger is legitimate and it's justified, if it's the only thing we do, then it might actually make us move away from the public thing. We need to bring people into the public thing. We need to be highlighting their stories, and the kind of stuff that Jeff in Huntington Beach is doing with KPFK, of highlighting good stories of cool stuff that's going, to let us know that there are solutions out there, that we are not merely participants, and we should not merely go to sleep and only dream. If there is going to be a dream fulfilled, we've got to work at it. Thanks, everybody, here for working at it. I'm Jeff. The call-in line is 202-808-9925. We're on Democracy's side, and we'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
say fight back!
Hey, over at ThomHartmann.com, we've got some really cool stuff. A lot of people don't realize that we produce a daily newsletter, and Sue puts we call it Sue's Daily Stack on there, which is literally a link to every story that I've talked about in the show. So all the research is right there. It's free. We don't share or sell our subscriber list. It's there's just it's there. It's there for you. And it's over at ThomHartmann.com. You can sign up for the free newsletter. You also can get my big picture take of the day, which is exclusively over at our website at ThomHartmann.com, as well as links to our videos, the book reports we typically do every day, all this stuff and more. It's all there at ThomHartmann.com. So check it out and sign up for our newsletter. I think you'll really enjoy it and appreciate it and find a lot of value there. We put a lot of work into this stuff. And you'll find it all right there on our website at ThomHartmann.com. And be sure to check out the newsletter and sign up for it. It's great. Our book today is Midnight in Chernobyl, The Untold Story of the World's Greatest Nuclear Disaster by Adam Higginbotham. This is from the prologue. Saturday, April 26, 1986, 4:16 p.m., Chernobyl Atomic Energy Station, Ukraine. Senior Lieutenant Alexander Logachev loved radiation the way other men love their wives. Tall and good-looking, 26 years old, with close-cropped dark hair and ice-blue eyes, Logachev had joined the Soviet Army when he was still a boy. They had trained him well. The instructors from the military academy outside Moscow taught him with lethal poisons and unshielded radiation. He traveled to the testing grounds of Semipalatinsk in Kazakhstan and to the desolate East Urals Trace, where the fallout from a clandestine radioactive accident still poisoned the landscape. Eventually, Logachev's training took him even to the remote and forbidden islands of Novaya Zemlya, high in the Arctic Circle, and ground zero for the detonation of the terrible Tsar Bomba, the largest thermonuclear device in history. Now, as the lead radiation reconnaissance officer of the 427th Red Banner Mechanized Regiment of the Kiev District Civil Defense Force, Logachev knew how to protect himself and his three-man crew from nerve agents, biological weapons, gamma rays, and hot particles, by doing their work just as the textbooks dictated, by trusting his dosimetry equipment, and, when necessary, reaching for the nuclear, bacterial, and chemical warfare medical kits stored in the cockpit of their armored car. But he also believed that the best protection was psychological. These men who allowed themselves to fear radiation were most at risk. But those who came to love and appreciate its spectral presence, to understand its caprices, could endure even the most intense gamma bombardment and emerge as healthy as before. As he sped through the suburbs of Kiev that morning at the head of a column of more than 30 vehicles summoned to an emergency at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, Logachev had every reason to feel confident. The spring air blowing through the hatches of his armored scout car carried the smell of the trees and the freshly cut grass. His men, gathered on the parade ground just the night before for their monthly inspection, were drilled and ready. At his feet, a battery of radiological detection instruments, including a newly installed electronic device twice as sensitive as the old model, murmured softly, revealing nothing unusual in the atmosphere around them. But as they finally approached the plant later that morning, it became clear that something extraordinary had happened. The alarm on the radiation dosimeter first sounded as they passed the concrete signpost marking the perimeter of the power station grounds, and the lieutenant gave orders to stop the vehicle and log their findings. 51 roentgens per hour. If they waited here just 60 minutes, they would all absorb the maximum dose of radiation permitted Soviet troops during wartime. They drove on, following the line of high-voltage transmission towers that marched toward the horizon in the direction of the power plant. Their readings climbed still further before falling again. Then, as the armored car rumbled along the concrete bank of the station's cooling canal, the outline of the fourth unit of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant finally became visible, and Logoshev and his crew gazed at it in silence. The roof of the 20-story building had been torn open, its other upper levels blackened and collapsed into heaps of rubble. They could see shattered panels of ferroconcrete, tumbled blocks of graphite, and here and there the glittering metal casings of fuel assemblies from the core of a nuclear reactor. A cloud of steam drifted from the wreckage into the sunlit sky. Yet they had orders to conduct a full reconnaissance of the plant. Their armored car crawled counterclockwise around the complex at 10 kilometers an hour. Sergeant Vlaskin called out the radiation readings from the new instruments, and Logoshev scribbled them down on a map, hand-drawn on a sheet of parchment paper in ballpoint pen and colored marker. 1 röntgen per hour, then 2, then 3. They turned left and the figures began to rise quickly. 10, 30, 50, 100. 250 röntgens an hour, the sergeant shouted, his eyes widening. Comrade Lieutenant, he began, and pointed at the radiometer. Logoshev looked down at the digital readout and felt his scalp prickle with terror. 2,080 röntgens an hour, an impossible number. Logoshev struggled to remain calm and remember the textbook, to conquer his fear. But his training failed him, and the lieutenant heard himself screaming in panic at the driver, petrified that the vehicle would stall. Why are you going this way, you son of a bee? Are you out of your effing mind? If this thing dies, we'll all be corpses in 15 minutes. Part 1, Chapter 1, The Soviet Prometheus. At the slow beat of approaching rotor blades, black birds rose into the sky, scattering over the frozen meadows and the pearly knots of creeks and ponds lacing the Pripyat River basin. Far below, standing knee-deep in snow, his breath lingering in heavy clouds, Viktor Brukhanov awaited the arrival of the nomenklatura from Moscow. When the helicopter touched down, the delegation of ministers and Communist Party officials trudged together over the icy field. The savage cold gnawed at their heavy woolen coats and nipped beneath their tall fur hats. The head of the Ministry of Energy and Electrification of the USSR and senior party bosses from the Soviet Socialist Republic of Ukraine joined Brukhanov at the spot where their audacious new project was to begin. Just 34 years old, clever and ambitious, a dedicated party man, Brukhanov had come to Western Ukraine with orders to begin building what would become the greatest nuclear power station on Earth. Midnight at Chernobyl.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hello there. I'm Jeff. This is the Thom Hartmann Program. My name is Jeff. I know it's not Thom Hartmann. It's weird because at the end of the show he says, that was Thom Hartmann. Anyway, it's actually Jeff, and I'm honored to be here. I'm honored to be with you. It is Thank You Thursday. We are shining a light on good stuff that's happening, good stuff that people can do to make an impact. I got my own list. I offered a couple of them. I'll offer a couple more. In a second, I'm also going to have a discussion with a conservative guy whose case is things are going pretty good. I want to hear that perspective and agree where we agree and maybe disagree where we maybe disagree. Some of the things we've heard so far that I want to put a highlight to as well are stuff we can get involved in that has structural impact. Gifts that keep on giving. When we were kids and we imagined finding a genie's lamp that gave us 3 wishes. What was always the third wish? More wishes. Gifts that keep on giving. As I've talked about at other times, that can also be political strategy. How can we put democracy in a position to do more and to do better? Yeah, direct service is good, but also how can we do service that also has structural impact? We had a caller, it was Greg, he said purpose-driven organizations. I try to give my money to those. We had Dr. Laura on how do we have better elections, which can mean we can do more stuff and better stuff. We had Jason call in about campaign finance limits and also publicly financed elections. More candidates who are more likely to have real connection to real lives and real human beings and real lived experience, and less likely to be bought and paid for by status quo interests that aren't worried about the greatest good for the greatest number. Building a neighborhood association that can solve more problems. What are structural impacts that you want to have? What are gifts that can keep on giving? What are things that you know about or that you hope people are working on? I'll plug a couple. If you're looking at elections, I know a lot of people are focused on presidential elections. There was a question that came up this week about, well, what about the U.S. Senate? Can the U.S. Senate be won? Well, right now, I gave a very quick answer. I'll give a little bit more robust of an answer. Yes, the Senate is up for grabs in 2020. Right now, Republicans are predicted to win a majority of U.S. Senate seats. Democrats are projected to win a majority of U.S. Senate votes, but since every state gets 2, whether you're California or Montana, right now Republicans are predicted to, still keep a smaller but still majority. That said, Cory Gardner in Colorado is a race. Susan Collins in Maine is a race. There are a bunch of others. We'll get through them either before the end of the show today or we'll do it tomorrow. State legislative races. I would argue that state legislative races, and I even tried to make this pitch to Tom and to people in the Bernie Sanders world, what they were thinking about doing after the 2016 election. It was not my hope that the primary objective was merely to win a presidency. I was hoping what they would do is work on something like this, which is state legislative chambers. State legislative chambers will be the places for most states where redistricting goes through, where voting rights laws go through, where pro-democracy legislation generally, it will not happen in Congress for the most part. Our best chances, and maybe it can, if there is a trifecta of pro-democracy candidates and pro-democracy chambers in both chambers of Congress, I said commerce, Congress and the presidency, then there's a chance, even a better chance at the state level. State legislative races in swing district are decided by usually dozens of votes, hundreds of votes, sometimes a couple thousands of votes, but not hundreds of thousands of votes. A single person, a group of friends, a team of a couple dozen people can make an enormous impact in a state legislative race. That's actually where the bus project got started. Took a bus, went to close state legislative races, and started winning them. And then Jeff Barker wins by 40 votes, and Jeff Merkley, instead of being a minority leader, instead, Jeff Merkley becomes a majority leader. Decided by one seat. One seat decided by 40 votes 2 years before that happened. Bunch of kids knocked on doors saying, hey, look, Ma, I helped change Oregon history. And they weren't lying. You can have a meaningful impact on state legislative races. Do that in swing districts, and you can start changing the power landscape around the country. What are you working on? What do you advise other people working on or to work on? 202-808-9925. I want to go to Brian. Brian from Schaumburg, Illinois. Brian, do you have something to work on, or do you have something you want to talk about?
Oh, I got more to work on, definitely. You're doing a really good job for Tom. I've been off work with a knee injury, and I've gotten to listen to quite a bit of his show lately. And you.
Sorry to hear about your injury.
Yeah, it's relatively minor. But anyhow, I'm an electrician, okay? And I'm a centrist. I'm in a union, but I listen to both sides. And I also have a good grasp on history. And I just want to say the average American lives better now than royalty did 100 years ago. I mean, if you think about it. I mean, both of my parents were born on small farms that did not have electricity or indoor plumbing. My grandmother on my mom's side, she gave birth to 10 children in a house with no indoor plumbing, no electricity, and just with either a country doctor or a midwife. Imagine living that life.
And if you don't mind me asking, how old are you now?
Me?
Yeah.
I'm late 50s.
Yeah.
I was born in 1961.
So there's no question that now I have a phone that I can push a button and it'll get me a car, and I can even afford that car most of the time.
Right.
No contesting that. I think it is a good thing for us to be grateful for the marvel that surrounds us. Where and I think it's easier for people in our generation. You're a little older than I am, but and yes, I made clear to make that point. But we're in the same ballpark, and that when we were born, the middle class was strong, among maybe the strongest that had been in American history, one of the strongest middle classes in world history, and college was still pretty cheap, and there were meaningful opportunities for lots of people to enter the middle class, and social mobility was pretty high. And there's a lot to be grateful for. And people older than us, that's true too. The challenge I have is the reason I don't only want to be grateful, or that I don't only want to rest on the laurels of my gratitude, is that I recognize for the generation that's coming up, they got it way different. Yeah, they can still use the same smartphone, right? But their ability to afford that ride is harder. Their student debt is way higher. Like the year I was born, a year at my law school cost the same as a flight between New York and Paris across the Atlantic Ocean. They were both about $1,000. A flight across the Atlantic Ocean, still about $1,000. Now a year at my law school, I just looked it up because I'm going to my reunion, $65,000 a year. $65,000, that's not inflation, right?
Can I make a couple points?
Yeah, go ahead.
You went to a pretty good law school, right?
It's hard to find, I did, but it's hard to find a private school. It's hard to find a law school that isn't borderline that expensive. I mean, people are getting crippled by debt, and that's not just me making that up.
Well, there's a dynamic in life I'd like to highlight, and I think it gets glossed over a lot by all talk radio. Because of decisions made by our political leaders and what's occurred in the human population on Earth, the human population of Earth has doubled since 1960. We've added 3.5 billion people to the planet. And then our political leaders have loosened everything up, so now everything is hyper-competitive. It's much, much more competitive than it was in 1965. We were a more nationalist country. We produced what we needed, mostly in the United States. Everything wasn't shipped out all over the world.
We got about 15 seconds before the break. Finish the point.
Right. But it's the hyper-competitive nature of what's going on with the growth of human beings, the human population, capitalism. And then we're going to think ahead a little bit. We're going to add another 3 billion people to the planet in the next 50 years.
Yeah, and I think those are critical facts. We're going to break. I'll deal with those a little bit after break, but it is both the impacts of those hyper-competition and of that growth, including climate change, that I think we do got to work on. We'll be back. This is Tom Show. I'm Jeff.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program. What's good out there? One caller said lots of stuff. And there's also stuff people are working on. We'll take your calls. Gretchen, Salem, Virginia, you are on the air.
Yeah, hi. Okay, so this is what people can do to have a bright future. And that's the name of a book that I would like Tom to take a look at and let us know what he thinks. So A Bright Future was written by Joshua Goldstein, and it's about nuclear. He had an hour show on C-SPAN, and it was about, he said that the old nuclear plants were really dangerous, and there's new generations, and we need to add nuclear to the Green Deal. And last night, Cory Booker said he voted present because he wants more things in the Green Deal, and he wants a real plan. And so he wants nuclear. He said the new generation is safer, but he didn't go into detail. So I want to know what the Union of Concerned Scientists thinks about the new generation. Joshua Goldstein said that in China, they haven't decided, so they're looking at 4 different plants. And I know that the Trump administration wants Westinghouse. So I don't necessarily trust what the Trump administration wants, but I think we need to really educate ourselves. This is a big topic. I mean, the Yankee, whatever, the one in Vermont Yankee, had pipes underground that were leaking, and they tried to hide it. We can't trust our regulatory agency. I'm going to stop talking now. But we need to educate ourselves by reading and finding out from the, Union of Concerned Scientists and other places. Thank you.
Gretchen, thank you so much. And educating ourselves and educating others is a wonderful, what I'm going to say is pablum in response, but it's genuinely felt pablum that educating ourselves and educating others, one of the very best things we can do. And it's one of the reasons I'm grateful to do this, because it makes me learn stuff, both to prepare and by listening to y'all. Susie from Parkton, Maryland.
It is Parkton, Maryland.
Go ahead.
I am 80, and what I do, there's people work very long hours in this area, so I send them texts about things that are going on in the community and some, pertinent, the national level too, so that they can read it when they get time. They can go and research for themselves. And what I've told them, that they can be responsibly informed when elections are, and work with whatever groups that they have in their work area. And I just wanted to share that. I don't have, money to do a lot of things, so that's my contribution, and I just use my cell phone and people that I meet and talk to them about, the issues and what their concerns are. And I might add, the concerns here are not on the level that I have been hearing. These are people concerned with jobs and food on the table and health care. So that's my contribution.
Appreciate
it. Thank you so much for allowing me to share this.
Well, thank you so much for sharing it with everybody, including not only today, but on a regular basis with the people in your community. And I will say, civically engaged neighborhoods have different elections, even if the rules are the same. Because the people like you, the people who their neighbors kind of know that they know what's going on, that they can be trusted, because they kind of pay attention, and they end up educating their neighbors about what's happening. They end up being public interest power brokers at small scales, and more of those end up being more antibodies in the bloodstream. And we are back. It is Thank You Thursday. We will be in the final hour talking about some local activism, an example of that around nuclear power plants. That may spur some debate. I will acknowledge the nuclear power debate is not one of my favorite debates, but it's interesting. And it's critically important. I don't mean to diminish that. But do want to take still your calls and hear about the things that you want to highlight, ways that people can have an impact. I said that I would share some of mine. I had made a list in preparation. I'll give a couple others. If you're looking for something that's electoral politics, Secretary of State races. I already plugged state legislative races, but Secretary of State's races. Voting rights, election protections, and often in many states, Secretaries of State also play a role in redistricting. Secretary of State's races tend to be a little bit lower profile, a little bit lower budget than a gubernatorial race or a U.S. Senate race, even a congressional race. But if what we're trying to figure out is in advance of 2020, right now, one of the underreported stories is what's happening in the census. The census matters for lots of reasons. One of the reasons it matters is for districts. For districts, yes, in legislative races and also congressional races. If we're going to have a majoritarian country where the decisions more often of who's going to be elected more often comport with the majority of human beings rather than with not the majority of human beings, we've got to do something about those districts, how they're drawn, and that means we've got to mess with, yes, gubernatorial races, yes, legislative races, but one of the underappreciated routes to pro-democracy efforts are races for Secretary of State in your state. That's another one. Another one I'll plug is voting systems generally. For people who are saying, well, I don't know, and I'm not a big Trump fan, but I never can't imagine myself registering the Democratic Party. Part of what I'd say is, listen, all political parties are is vessels. You go to the vessel that looks like the one that is a little bit closest to you, and then you try to have the impact on it that you can. One of the reasons I like local action is it isn't just you piling on to whatever power structure that is operating in Washington, D.C. But the other thing is that I do think that voting systems, from star voting to ranked choice voting to multi-member districts, ways that we can innovate and let our states and localities be laboratories for democracy, as Brandeis suggested, is another way that you can get engaged. And here's one. I want to play Adam Schiff's piece, what he just had to say, because another thing we can do is stand up. Another thing we can do is be strong. And here's Adam Schiff when people were saying, oh, because there were no charges brought by Bill Barr, you should resign, Adam Schiff. You should do what we say because the institutionalists weren't willing to disrupt the institutions. And here's what Adam Schiff had to say instead.
And as you have chosen, instead of addressing the hearing to simply attack me, consistent with the president's attacks, I do want to respond in this way. My colleagues may think it's okay that the Russians offered dirt on a Democratic candidate for president as part of what was described as the Russian government's effort to help the Trump campaign. You might think that's okay. My colleagues might think it's okay that when that was offered to the son of the president, who had a pivotal role in the campaign, that the president's son did not call the FBI. He did not adamantly refuse that foreign help. No, instead, that son said that he would love the help of the Russians. You might think it's okay that he took that meeting. You might think it's okay that Paul Manafort, the campaign chair, someone with great experience in running campaigns, also took that meeting. You might think it's okay that the president's son-in-law also took that meeting. You might think it's okay that they concealed it from the public. You might think it's okay that their only disappointment after that meeting was that the dirt they received on Hillary Clinton wasn't better. You might think that's okay. You might think it's okay that when it was discovered a year later that they lied about that meeting and said it was about adoptions. You might think it's okay that the president is reported to have helped dictate that lie. You might think that's okay. I don't. You might think it's okay that the campaign chairman of a presidential campaign would offer information about that campaign to a Russian oligarch in exchange for money or debt forgiveness. You might think that's okay. I don't. You might think it's okay that that campaign chairman offered polling data, campaign polling data to someone linked to Russian intelligence. I don't think that's okay. You might think it's okay that the president himself called on Russia to hack his opponent's emails if they were listening. You might think it's okay that later that day, in fact, the Russians attempted to hack a server affiliated with that campaign. I don't think that's okay. You might think that it's okay that the president's son-in-law sought to establish a secret back channel of communications with the Russians through a Russian diplomatic facility. I don't think that's okay. You might think it's okay that an associate of the president made direct contact with the GRU through Guccifer II and WikiLeaks and is considered a hostile intelligence agency. You might think that it's okay a senior campaign official was instructed to reach that associate and find out what that hostile intelligence agency had to say in terms of dirt on his opponent. You might think it's okay that the National Security Advisor designate secretly conferred with a Russian ambassador about undermining U.S. sanctions, and you might think it's okay he lied about it to the FBI. You might say that's all okay. You might say that's just what you need to do to win. But I don't think it's okay. I think it's immoral. I think it's unethical. I think it's unpatriotic. And yes, I think it's corrupt and evidence of collusion.
What can we do? What do we do if we are concerned that democracy is under attack? What are you doing? Not just to highlight the bad news, but to make some good news. It's Thank You Thursday. I'm Jeff. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. Call us.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
What's good out there? 202-808-9925. What's good?
reading today from a book by Four Arrows, also known as Donald Jacobs or Don Jacobs. It's titled Point of Departure, Returning to Our More Authentic Worldview for Education and Survival. This is from Chapter 3, Community-Oriented Self-Authorship. Knowing the power of intentional and unintentional trance-based learning and how the latter can make us susceptible to believing untoward communication from authority figures, we can understand one reason self-authorship is important in the indigenous worldview. When we are in control of our thinking and trust our intuitive insights, our natural trance awareness helps prevent misdirection from external influences. It gives us the authority for what we can then instill in our minds to achieve. If someone such as a trusted shaman or psychologist has, certain skills at hypnosis, we might tentatively authorize him or her to help us form the most effective images, but we do so with full awareness. More important than avoiding negative influence from perceived authority figures, however, is the self-authorship via indigenous worldview that gives high degrees of individual autonomy to people while at the same time assuring that people use their freedoms to help their communities. In the indigenous worldview, the highest authority for all decisions comes from one's personal, honest reflection on lived experience with the understanding that everything is related. It is this understanding that makes a distinction between self-authorship, as it is generally perceived in the dominant worldview, and that of the indigenous one. Self-authorship is always ultimately in the service of the greater good in the latter. Self-authorship in indigenous ways of thinking comes from knowing that the highest experience for decisions comes from honest reflection on lived experience in light of realizing that everything is related in life, and this interconnectedness must be a part of all decisions. Michael Anthony Hart gets to these ideas about inner authority coming from such reflection. Through inward exploration, tapping into creative forces that run through all life, individuals come to subjectively experience a sense of wholeness. This exploration is an experience in context, where the context is the self in connection with happenings, and the findings from such experience is knowledge. Happenings may be facilitated through rituals or ceremonies that incorporate dreaming, visioning, meditation, and prayer. The findings from such experiences are encoded in community praxis as a way of synthesizing knowledge derived from introspection. Hence, indigenous peoples' cultures recognize and affirm the spiritual through practical applications of inner space, excuse me. Such a holistic understanding of accessing, trusting, and exercising our inner authority is the source of the creativity and knowledge synthesis we need for addressing our global problems. While Ehrman refers to this inner authority with the Cree term mamatawisin, which is the capacity to tap the creative life forces of the inner space by the use of all the faculties that consume our being, it is to exercise inwardness. This understanding is missing from our dominant worldview, where objective-based outward exploration is sought for guidance rather than introspective knowledge development. Dependence on external authority is the rule in spite of the call to question authority that has always resonated on the fringes. Under the dominant worldview, obedience trumps community-oriented self-authorship. Decision-making is rarely a holistic process, nor does it utilize alternative states of awareness, deep reflection, and community praxis. The random quotations below, selected from an internet search, reveal that obedience to authority is common under the dominant worldview. Obedience to lawful authority is the foundation of manly characteristics by Robert E. Lee. All religions have based morality on obedience, Alexander Herzen. Obedience brings peace in decision-making, James Faust. Justice is the insurance that we have on our lives and property. Obedience is the premium we pay for it, William Penn. I was not born to be free. I was born to adore and obey, C.S. Lewis. Every game has rules. Life's a game that has its respective rules. Obey the rules, win the game, Israel Ahavor. A wolf cannot have more than one head, or it tears itself apart, Con Iggulden. From a social dissident on the fringe, Noam Chomsky wrote, any dictator would admire the uniformity and obedience of the U.S. media. From an indigenous-raised Lakota, Oyesa, the American Indian was an individualist in religion as in war. Reliance on external authority is not only the bedrock of choices in mainstream society and the main approach to moral development, but it also gives jurisprudence or guides jurisprudence and conflict resolution. Authorized punishment or revenge is a primary goal for wrongdoing. Under Indigenous worldview, bringing offenders back into community via affected members of the community is the goal. This relational approach expands the circle of land and seeks input from the wide circle of relevant people. Spiritual resources are employed via prayer or song, and subjectivity is as important as objectivity. Hart emphasizes this relationship as emphasizing spirit and spirituality, and in turn, a sense of communitism and respectful individualism. And then he goes on about the Indigenous worldview and how it relates to what we would call communism. Point of departure by 4 arrows.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
We're back. I'm Jeff. It's Thank You Thursday. I want to say thank you to somebody. It's a little bit personal. Somebody who just got out of surgery. Representative Alyssa Kenny Geyer, state representative from Oregon. She's been working on tenant protections. She's been working on protections for, she's been working on voting rights. She worked on campaign finance reform. She's working on healthcare funding. And speaking of healthcare, she just had, I think, 12 hours of cancer surgery and just got out of it this morning. From what I hear, the surgery went well. Our love is with her. For those of us who pray, our prayers are with her, and our gratitude is with her. One little thing I remember, the last vote I cast when I was in the legislature was one that did not ingratiate me with some sectors of power. And I sat next to Representative Alyssa Kenny Geyer, and it was one of our big employers is Nike. And they don't, or it's one of our big businesses. They don't manufacture the shoes, obviously, in Oregon, but they do a lot of design there, a lot of marketing there, and it's important to our state, and I wear the shoes all the time. They wanted a permanent tax break, and they wanted to make sure that anything that was done to address underfunding of schools didn't increase their taxes at all, and we were called in for a special session. The only thing on the agenda for that special session was giving Nike a permanent tax break. I'm still offended by it. I still don't think it's the kind of thing a Banana Republic does. But we all want to support Nike. And I knew I wasn't coming back to the legislature. I hadn't run for re-election. I'd run for something else and lost. And I said, well, even though I know, I asked a friend of mine, I said, what should I do? He said, well, you won't know unless you want a job after you leave the legislature. I had nothing to lose, really, because I mean, maybe something, but not much, because I was leaving. Alyssa Kenny Geyer wasn't leaving. As I recall, she was, I think, one of 2 no votes on that thing. Maybe there were more than 2, but I only remember 2. And she stood there and stood up over and over again, stood up against power in favor of people, stood up for democracy, stood up for campaign finance reform, stood up for automatic voter registration, stood up to make it easier for young people to participate, for renters to participate, for people of color to participate. She has spent her life in service. And right now, our thoughts and gratitude are with Alyssa Kenny Geyer. We love you. I certainly do. Another piece of good news, something that you can do in your town. If you're not in the legislature, well, you can help somebody who runs, or you can think about running yourself. But you can also think about pushing policy, and policy at the local level that could have systemic, a massive, lasting change. You can start a bank. But instead of having that bank, one that only has for-profit purpose, you could start a bank that was for the benefit of the people in your community. And you could make sure, in fact, that the public started that bank. Joining us right now is Ellen Brown. She is the founder of the Public Banking Institute, the author of numerous books, including Web of Debt and the Public Bank Solution. The website is publicbankinginstitute.org. Right now, I know San Jose just passed a resolution in favor of public banks. She'll probably know more about it than I do, and I want to hear about it. This is something that lots of towns, don't have to be the country, doesn't even have to be a state, that a town could do Ellen Brown, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for talking about this subject.
So what are what's the quick argument in favor of a public bank? Or respond to it this way. Wait a minute, doesn't the government mess stuff up? Why should the government get in the banking business?
That is a typical response. But we have one state-owned bank, the Bank of North Dakota, and it has proved the model. It is safe, effective, saves a lot of money for the government. It's never been caught in corruption, as far as I know, and they operate at much lower cost than an ordinary bank. So they actually do much better than regular banks. Globally, there are close to 700 public banks with assets. I just saw this of $40 trillion. And that's a conservative estimate. That's not counting like central banks, which technically a central bank is also a public bank. It's owned by the government. But just the local public banks are huge globally, and they could fund a lot of things that people are in favor of that we haven't managed to get our private banks to fund.
And so, yeah, say more. Usually the public bank movement isn't a consumer bank, right? It's not somewhere you take your ATM card and you go down to the, Bank of North Dakota, the Bank of San Jose, the Bank of Poughkeepsie, and the Bank of Poughkeepsie, I don't know if that exists. It's probably a private bank, and take out something and deposit something there, right? The public bank is usually for funding what kind of projects or for depositing what kind of resource?
Right. Well, if we follow the Bank of North Dakota model, which is what we would recommend, in North Dakota, all of the state's funds are deposited in the bank, and then they're leveraged for public purposes. So what we would recommend is you start with infrastructure. Just start by refinancing the government's own debt at a lower rate, which we can easily show you can do, and you can save money, and it's risk-free because you know the client. You are the client. You've already committed to make these whatever loans or expenditures, and you can just do them at, much more efficiently. But globally, there are banks that take individual deposits. The German model is quite prominent and popular. They have the Sparkassen banks, which have half the retail banking business in the country. Yeah. And they, too, are very low cost, very efficient, and have done a lot of good for not just for individuals, but for local businesses.
And since 2007, this might seem like a dumb question. We shouldn't have to do too much convincing of why highly wealth-concentrated private banks aren't the only way to go, and that there ought to be some other options for public organization to put in their money. But give a quick reasons. You gave the data. Well, actually, they save money. They're more efficient than private banks. How come? Give a plug for why the public bank makes sense.
Okay. Well, the way a bank works, all governments have revolving funds where they lend money out typically to businesses, maybe to build infrastructure. But what a bank does is that it could take that same amount of money, call it capital, and then it can lend, technically it can lend 10 or 12 times as much. So it can make many more loans. So let's say you were making 3% loans, suddenly you're making 30% on your money instead of 3%. You do need deposits to back the loans, but a public bank, such as the Bank of North Dakota, which has put all of its state's revenues in the bank, has plenty of liquidity to use for that purpose. And the public bank will focus on things that, it doesn't do speculative things. It will do things that benefit the local community. Yep. So it obviously saves the local community money because you're using your own bank, you're leveraging your own funds for your own purposes.
And what are some places, what are you seeing? Are you seeing some traction out there? Are people, I don't know. It had never even occurred to me until about the last 8 years that this is something that people could be or should be working on. Are there any evidence out there of people working on this stuff and actually making some traction?
Yes. Right now, I think there are 25 active bills across the country in cities and states across the country for publicly owned banks. The one that's probably gotten the farthest is in Washington State. They currently have a bill on, they've allocated $480,000 for a business plan, which is supposed to be out in June, and 23 of the state senators, are in their public bank caucus, which is pretty close to, they only need 26 for a majority.
Yeah.
So they're hopeful of finally getting a bill passed. They've been working on it since 2010. It was Bob Hasegawa was the first to bring a state bank bill in recent memory. And he's, gone through bill after bill, but they don't give up each time the bill gets, tabled or whatever. Then they respond to what the objections were and hone something new.
Yeah.
So this last time around, one of the members of the caucus said, well, we keep getting the same objections, so let's just show how we're going to do it. Instead, they always say, how are you going to fund it, what sort of loans you're going to make,
decided to do a business plan to sort of preempt some of those questions. Ellen Brown, I want to say thank you so much. You're with the Public Banking Institute. Really appreciate your time. If people want to find out more, it's publicbankinginstitute.org. Ellen, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Please do listen to that one, because this is a thing you can do at the state level. It's also a thing you do at the local level. A city can do this. Think about how much money, and I understand a little town would have a harder time, but even one of the bigger towns, we get callers from Chicago. Chicago can totally do this. San Jose can totally, Portland can totally do this. I bet Montpelier could probably do it. There are enough deposits just from the local community, just from the payroll that have got to be used to pay the public workers, from the fees and taxes and water bills, et cetera, that come through. There's enough resource that just the interest off that is real money. And by the way, it doesn't cost any taxes. You're not reaching anybody's pocket. It's not a trade-off in that way. Other advantages, the money circulates in the local community. Private bank, all the money gets sucked up with a silent sucking sound all the way to the eastern seaboard. You can invest in micro-lending. You can invest in infrastructure, not just by privatizing infrastructure, but by having public resource that can help invest in infrastructure. A network of public banks done to make sure that fraud is avoided, done to make sure you treat it with a conservative, not right-wing, but conservative attitude, could transform the monetary system in this country. We'll be back with more. 202-808-9925. We love you.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Do listen to thomhartmann.com for video and radio archives. Steve, you're on from Orlando, Florida. Go ahead.
Hey, Jeff. Just talking first about your recent caller, the public. I'd like to see a public bank open in every post office.
There you go.
Also, I wanted to say that Adam Schiff, that's okay. I went on YouTube. I had time. And already posted it. Thank you. Now, but mine is a suggestion for someone else to do. It has to be a wealthy person or a foundation or, what I want and what I don't see and what I've asked the Gates Foundation and others for with no response was instead of funding large organizations with millions of dollars per investment, they need to find and fund the many local and state grassroots organizations. Many are nonprofit, and they have very dedicated and mostly volunteer members, and organizers who spend all their time working on their particular social justice and civil liberties and human rights and environmental issues. And $1 million, they could make $100,000 to $200,000, $5,000 to $10,000 contributions that would be an enormous help to these local groups, and none of them do it.
It's Steve, it's such an important point that the big money ends up having relationships with the big development directors, the big fundraisers.
Right.
And the big development directors and the big fundraisers have relationships with the big organizations. So when the wealthy donor is trying to divvy up, and I know I'm only amplifying what you already know, but when the wealthy donor is trying to figure out their giving plan, they ask, well, who's the person they've contracted to do that, or who's just the person whose advice they trust? They go to one of the well-connected development advisors, and those well-connected development advisors are well-connected to people who are also well-connected. And I think back even to the bus project days, and and I don't want to cast aspersions at it because it's usually to the good. But I can even think back to the early bus project days. Early bus project days, our first year budget was $100,000. For that, I think we did $1 million worth of work, and the reason was because I was working. I was supposed to be doing another job, but I was nearly full time doing that. We had another person who was earning a little bit of a stipend. It was almost we had some interns. We were all essentially interns. It was almost entirely volunteer driven. We needed the money to fuel up the bus, feed the volunteers. The organization got stronger, the organization got better, but it never got more cost efficient. The most valuable political contribution to this day I'm aware of were people who gave in that year. That small early effort that was doing something real was the best political contribution that someone could give. Amen to you, Steve.
Well, so how do we get people to do it? I mean, I don't mind helping to facilitate, but there's so many organizations, I mean, even here in Orlando, but I'm sure they're in every community around the country that need funding, and a small amount of funding would be just enormous help to them.
Yeah, I will say one thing, even just bringing it up here I think is worthwhile. Hopefully it leaks out to the zeitgeist a little bit. But if people have friends who are in fact connected folks, and if you do have a friend or if you are yourself a major donor, there are a couple things very practically you can do. One is we could actually have a fund that's just the small group fund. And there's one, Mackenzie River Gathering does that in our state where it only funds organizations of under a certain amount of, under a certain budget. Not because they don't like big organizations, but they just think that's a place they can help a lot. That we could have more little foundations like that. Another way people can help, and this might sound crazy, but think about in your will, putting into it a foundation, even if it's modest. Putting real money into, instead of just getting your name put on something, invest in democracy and include smaller organizations as you do it. Steve, they're making us run away, but I appreciate your call from Orlando.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. This is Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jefferson Smith, sitting in, honored to do so. So grateful for your kindness, for your helpful calls. It's been Thank You Thursday, but as we do every single day, it is time for Talk Media News, talkmedianews.com. I believe they are with us now. Go ahead. Bob Ney, you there?
Yes. Hi, Jefferson. How are you?
I am well. It's good to hear your voice. What's cracking?
Well, I wanted to get into something that may not be a huge headline today across the news, but it's a big deal, and it's the Trump administration. They're beginning the process to remove mortgage guarantors from the government oversight of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac.
Yep.
And of course, when the housing bubble burst, there was a great big security mortgage meltdown, and that had the crisis we know about in 2008. It affected worldwide financial crisis. And a lot of people at that time held that the Congress was unwilling to rein in Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Now, on this one, I did, just a matter of disclosure, I chaired the Housing Subcommittee, and Maxine Waters was my ranking member, and we were the ones that, along with another subcommittee, oversaw for quite a few years, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And at that time, generically, people said, oh, well, they were helping too many low-income people with loans. But, the task was to make sure that people, just because they didn't have high incomes, could maybe gain access to the housing market.
Yeah.
And I mention that because on the surface, Jefferson, what we're going to hear is that, well, we need to have, a new regulatory scheme for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and they are quasi, private enterprise and quasi-government. Now, the analysis, and all the analysts from Goldman Sachs said that this should have only a limited effect on the housing market. And they said that they're skeptical of sweeping changes. There's some constraints on the authority of the Treasury, et cetera. But then Goldman Sachs says, we expect the Trump administration to proceed cautiously to avoid the disruption of the market. And the reason I bring this story up with all that's going on is this is a big deal. And, they're going to have to be extremely careful how this administration carries this out, what they do to the housing market. Are they just going to let there be a free rein and back to, very little oversight of these entities? And will they not have these entities also help low-income people? So there's a lot to this story as it will develop. It does luckily have to go through the House and the Senate.
So yeah, Kant says go to motive. What do you see as the motive here? It seems like one is, well, let's clean up the system. The other one that I get nervous about is, well, I know the power and the money that's at play here, and the desire to do go to further lengths to privatize the banking system is in the interest of people who want more money in their private banking system. But where do you see as the people pushing this?
Well, I don't think it's as simple as the administration's statement about, wanting to make sure that they're under the regulatory schemes. They're already under a receivership, a conservatorship by the government. And so where I see it going is the latter of what you mentioned, which is the possible, privatization. And then those entities would not have to have as part of their charter helping people of, low to middle income. They wouldn't have to have that, just like today a bank doesn't unless they have a CRE, as it's called, with the investment area. So, yes, I see it as a potential step where they will be free with, billions and billions of dollars to not have to, do something to, again, help people into the American dream of housing. So I think it's not something just on the surface. There's a motive behind what this is. Haven't figured it all out yet, but I think it needs to have attention.
Yeah, and that's the thing, and thank you for bringing it up, and it connects with the public banking mini segment that we just did on how do we have a banking system that works more for people rather than just everybody working for the banking system. And that's actually something that should be a significant priority in a bipartisan way. The only people that really benefit from a concentrated wealth banking system are the people who own the concentrated wealth banking system and the people who are there, the people who sell them stuff. So,
well, that's right.
It's a big deal. There is a push to privatize this stuff. And the other thing I want to say, and I'm so grateful you brought it up, and for our smart listeners, in the hopes that they'll nerd out on this kind of thing, is that it is the kind of thing we don't pay attention to enough. It's not as headline worthy as so many other things that come up. It doesn't seem to be so headline worthy. But meanwhile, it's where all the money is.
Oh, of course. And there was a very broad simplification at the time in 2008 of, well, the Congress did too many loans to people who were low income and couldn't afford to pay. That's not the truth. There was predatory lending in the system, and then Fannie Mae had to be audited, and the people auditing it were in bed with them. And so, it's a very complicated piece of the puzzle. Now, they did need to be taken under the government. There's no doubt about that. But again, if it's just, no problem now, all strings are cut, and let's just see how they function in the private sector, then they will not have a government task of trying to help not just the wealthy to make money in the system, but to help people who need housing.
Yeah, and then what happens, there are certain things that aren't rocket science. They're important, that are hard. Like when we think about what government should do and shouldn't do, I don't think government needs to invent my telephone. I don't think government should do that. But when it comes like insurance services and banking services, those things aren't rocket science. Most of the innovation in banking services is usually just turbocharged leverage that can turbocharge an economic crash. It's not like inventing the new debit card every week. There's not. It does not require the Manhattan Project on banking. What it requires is good fiduciary responsibility to take good care of the money that is deposited.
Absolutely.
Anything else you want to make sure we cover?
Oh, yes, real quick. I know we're out of time, but the FAA, it's amazing. They changed the aerodynamics of the plane. Thom Hartmann, by the way, hit this on the head last week, and they changed the aerodynamics. They changed the computer system, the upgrades. But what they didn't do was make the pilots go into flight simulators. They let them use their iPads.
Yeah, they were. From what I understand, they were going fast. They were trying to hustle to beat the competition, and therefore they didn't give enough training.
Airbus, yes.
Thank you so much, Bob Ney. We appreciate it. Talk Media News, talkmedianews.com. We'll be back on the Thom Hartmann Show. We're going to be talking, yes, nuclear power. We're also going to be talking about Thank You Thursday. What are you grateful for? What do we got to work on?
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
Hey, over at ThomHartmann.com, we've got some really cool stuff. A lot of people don't realize that we produce a daily newsletter, and Sue puts we call it Sue's Daily Stack on there, which is literally a link to every story that I've talked about in the show. So all the research is right there. It's free. We don't share or sell our subscriber list. It's there's just it's there. It's there for you. And it's over at ThomHartmann.com. You can sign up for the free newsletter. You also can get my big picture take of the day, which is exclusively over at our website at ThomHartmann.com, as well as links to our videos, the book reports we typically do every day, all this stuff and more. It's all there at ThomHartmann.com. So check it out and sign up for our newsletter. I think you'll really enjoy it and appreciate it and find a lot of value there. We put a lot of work into this stuff. And you'll find it all right there on our website at ThomHartmann.com. And be sure to check out the newsletter and sign up for it. It's great. We're reading today from Guns for Hire, how the CIA and U.S. Army recruit mercenaries for White Rhodesia. It's a historical reprint of what appears to be a 1979 pamphlet, basically. This is from the introduction. It does have an ISBN number. It is available in book sources. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, actually this must have been published post-1980 because they're referencing Zimbabwe. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, 270,000 white settlers, mostly immigrated since World War II, controlled the government and economy, ruling over the 7 million black Africans. The Zimbabweans cannot vote. They have been forced off the bulk of the arable land, and they have no democratic rights whatsoever. All labor performance in Zimbabwe is black labor, and it is intensely exploited, often at less than subsistence wages. Zimbabweans have been fighting European invaders since the early 17th century. Since the 1890s, they have been directly ruled by Europeans, at first in the form of a private British corporation, the British South Africa Company. Since 1923, direct political rule has been in the hands of the white settlers, currently led by Ian Smith and his fascist Rhodesian Front Party. It's important to note that the white settlers were originally given this direct local power as a, quote, self-governing colony of the British government, thereby creating a master-caretaker relationship. During these past 80-odd years, Western imperialism, the multinational corporations of the United States, Britain, and South Africa, has extracted huge profits from the exploited and oppressed Zimbabwean population via the subsidiaries of the Anglo-Americans, Lonrho, Amex, AMAX, Union Carbide, Mobil, ITT, and other corporations. They fully intend to continue doing so as long as they can. The white settler minority has been rewarded for their violent subjugation of the Zimbabwean people with perhaps the highest national standard of living in the world. Sir Roy Walensky, the former Prime Minister of the Central African Federation, which included what is now Rhodesia, once said, "This man Smith has an appeal. It's the appeal of an easy life. For $6,000 a year, you can have 5 servants, a swimming pool, and a lot." Beginning during the early 1960s, however, the Zimbabwean nationalist forces, under the leadership of the Zimbabwe African National Union, ZANU, evolved the strategy of guerrilla war to liberate their people and land. It is proving to be very successful. There are 20,000 guerrillas in base camps in Tanzania and Mozambique, over 3,000 in Zimbabwe itself, and this number is continually rising. In a meeting between Stephen Solars, a U.S. congressman, and the ZANU guerrilla leaders, they were reported to reject the possibility of enlisting the assistance of Cuban or other foreign troops, declaring that if we cannot liberate ourselves, we do not deserve to be liberated. Despite Western propaganda to the effect that the U.S. and British only wish to avoid a bloodshed in Rhodesia, don't forget the Zimbabweans have been bleeding for almost a century, their real fear is that the liberation struggle will win. With this victory in sight, it is not surprising that the counterattack by the Smith regime has become more vicious and brutal. Actually, this must have been published pre-1980, because this is when Smith was still in power in Rhodesia. More than 250,000 rural Zimbabweans have been forced into concentration camps. Terrorist raids have been conducted against Zimbabwean refugees in Mozambique. Dusk to dawn shoot-on-sight curfews have been instituted and enforced in the border areas. And escalating counterinsurgency attacks have been launched against the military arm of the liberation struggle, the Zimbabwean People's Army, ZIPA. It is crucial for Westerners to understand that the Smith regime has not stood alone in this barbaric campaign. This pamphlet documents the critically important element in U.S. imperialism's support for the Smith regime: white mercenary reinforcements for the fascist Rhodesian, quote, security forces. This flow of U.S. mercenaries to prop up white Rhodesia is an important, though secret, part of U.S. imperialism's strategy for Africa. The U.S. has massive investments in southern Africa. Zimbabwe alone supplies the bulk of high-grade chrome ore used in the U.S. for jet engines and other advanced technological items. Coal, copper, and other minerals are ripped out of Zimbabwe for U.S. industry. Mobil Oil, Texaco, Hertz Rent-A-Cars, Holiday Inns, and many other U.S. corporations operate illegally in Rhodesia through foreign subsidiaries. More important still is South Africa, the fortress of U.S. interests in Africa, where $1.5 billion is invested by GM, IBM, Ford, and other giant multinational corporations. The liberation of Zimbabwe would, for the first time, penetrate the buffer zone of satellite countries protecting the borders of South Africa. South African guerrilla fighters, who are already training by the thousands in camps in Tanzania and Zambia, would have direct access to re-enter their land and accelerate the liberation struggle. Knowing that the stakes are high, U.S. imperialism has worked to strengthen the white supremacist outposts in Africa, although at times this had to be done covertly. In 1970, the Nixon White House approved Henry Kissinger's Operation Tar Baby strategy, based on Option 2 of the Secret National Security Study Memorandum No. 39. This strategy essentially called for covert military assistance, including direct exchanges, so the South African troops could be trained in the U.S. in specialized tactics and weapons. This would be done while the U.S. tried to convince Africans that it was on their side. This is from the pamphlet number 39, that Kissinger memorandum. We would maintain public opposition to racial oppression, but relax political isolation and economic restrictions without openly taking a position undermining the United Kingdom and the UN on Rhodesia. We would be more flexible in our attitudes toward the Smith regime. And it goes on from there. Guns for hire.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Oh, hi. How you doing? I'm Jeff. This is the Thom Hartmann Program. It is Thank You Thursday. We are giving shouts out and an answer to a question that kept coming up earlier in the week, which is, what the heck can I do? If I want to not just fall asleep and dream, if I want to not just avoid, if I want to not just be angry, if I want to channel that anger to something constructive, if I want to be brutally honest about the critical facts facing our situation and at the same time be confident that ultimately democracy can win if we work at it, what do? Had some marvelous calls. Appreciate Greg, whose point was put your dollars where your values are, from where you bank to what you buy. To Jeff, a different Jeff, who organizes a Thursday night celebration, essentially a reminder for self-care. Dr. Laura, who's working on election integrity in Cook County. David, who established a neighborhood association. Jason, who's working on campaign finance reform. The math, and by the way, you can call in at 202-808-9925. You can also tweet us at Thom Hartmann or at me, Jefferson D. Smith. Math Mactivist said, what about working on the lower voting age and also pushing for democracy in the workplace? We'll share your tweets and your calls. Something else that has been worked on, and for people who grew up in the nuclear age, this feels even more deeply important, is art and its intersection with storytelling about activism that was done to try to make sure that our power system, and I don't just mean power over democracy, but actually energy and power, is cleaner rather than messier. And with us now is Robbie Lepser. Robbie Lepser is a documentary filmmaker chronicling grassroots social change movements. He's been doing it for 40 years. Free Speech TV is hosting the national broadcast premiere of Power Struggle tonight at 8 p.m., which is also the 40th anniversary of the 3 Mile Island nuclear accident, the worst commercial nuclear power plant accident in U.S. history. Robbie, thanks so much for being with us.
Well, thanks, Jeff, for having me on.
What did you grapple with in telling this story, and what wasn't told yet about this story that you wanted to make sure got out?
Well, I've been a documentary filmmaker for 40 years. I actually got an early start when I was 18, and I've really dedicated my life to chronicle stories of people who stick their necks out to take risks for social change, to promote social justice, to protect the environment, to stop war.
I appreciate it.
And I live 18 miles. I live in Western Massachusetts, 18 miles from the Vermont Yankee nuclear power plant. And if there was ever an accident of a major release of radiation at this plant, my community would be affected. So I became concerned about the nuclear power plant. And as a filmmaker, when I first heard that Vermont was in a very unique position of being the only state in the country whose legislature was empowered to make a decision about the future operation of a nuclear power plant, and I thought this would make an ideal decision, an ideal subject for a documentary. I had no idea how long it was going to take, 5 years filming, 2 years editing. I never knew what the outcome was going to be, but the fact that citizens would actually have a voice in major issues that affect their lives, in this case, the future of energy and the safety of their communities, I wanted to make a documentary to really show the grassroots democracy in action.
First of all, thank you. And telling stories of people who've done wonderful things, not only stories of bad things that are happening, but people who are responding to bad things, much love to you. Let's play a clip from your documentary.
What many of you are working on is one of the great struggles of our time, to create an energy future which protects not only our generation, but a safe energy future for our kids and our grandchildren.
How can you trust a company who has really not taken seriously, in my opinion, the fact that we have leaking nuclear waste going into the ground?
Yankee was the company that was in charge of 3 Mile Island. Is this for those of us who are novices on this stuff, connect some of the dots about the key players?
Well, the company that ran the Vermont Yankee nuclear power plant is Entergy. It is the second largest nuclear power company in the country. Now that Vermont Yankee is shut down, though, they've sold it to another company, North Star Group Services, and that is going to be in charge of the decommissioning. And what people don't realize is that even when a nuclear power plant is shut down, the nuclear waste is going to stay radioactive for 250,000 years.
Yeah, that's the problem in the first place, right? I mean, that's the beef against nuclear energy is that it doesn't go away. So shutting down the plant doesn't mean you solved that problem.
Yeah, at least not new waste is being created, but the waste that's there is going to stay there indefinitely because there's no place to put it.
So to the Cory Bookers of the world who make the argument, say, listen, you're right that we need to decommission these old bad power plants, but new, not as bad nuclear power plants, better than coal plants, better than other energy sources, better than being reliant on foreign oil, cleaner, has less of an impact, or arguably cleaner. And that's the point that I'm hoping that you will address. Fewer emissions, less impact on climate change, arguably. What's your response, or what was your response in the documentary?
Well, the fact is that nuclear creates the most toxic substances known to the planet. Again, they are going to be dangerous for 250,000 years, and there's no solution for this problem. So nuclear is anything but clean and green. The nuclear industry is trying to promote itself as clean and green, but it's anything but. It's really important that nuclear be on the radar screen for the climate justice movement, because it is just as dangerous, and some people would argue even more dangerous than fossil fuels. So it really should be hand in hand that we need clean, renewable energy like solar and wind.
Well, really appreciate your time. Plug the film again. Thank you so much for being with us, and thank you so much for your work.
Well, Power Struggle is going to be aired tonight at 8 o'clock on Free Speech TV, and it'll be repeatedly aired throughout the spring and throughout the coming year on Free Speech TV, so you can check it out. Also at our website, powerstrugglemovie.com, is a place where you can go to find out more information about the film, watch a trailer, and we're launching a grassroots distribution campaign. I'm going to be traveling around the country, and we're looking for grassroots groups to set up screenings for the film in their communities and at schools. So please contact us again at powerstrugglemovie.com. Robbie Lepser, the movie is in fact airing tonight on Free Speech TV. Shout out and such gratitude to Free Speech TV for airing it and for being a partner of the Thom Hartmann Show. We appreciate it. Thank you so much, Robbie. Appreciate it. powerstrugglemovie.com. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Well, folks, how much time do we got before our break? 30 seconds. Well, I was going to go to Colleen. Colleen, you're on the air. You wanted to say something about nuclear power in the next 20 seconds.
Okay, it's going to take just that long. I had an uncle who was one of these blindingly brilliant people who worked at a nuclear power plant here in Long Island called Brookhaven Labs. And he finally left his position because his opinion, as he told it to me and my father, was that watching humanity with nuclear power was like watching a 3-year-old with a stick of dynamite in one hand and a match in the other. Just because we can create it doesn't mean we can control it.
We can't control it. We can't get rid of it. It's not just playing with matches. It's playing with matches and the dynamite. Colleen, thank you so much for calling in. We'll be right back to the Thom Hartmann Show.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be back in just a little bit. Yeah, we'll finish up that conversation on nuclear power and also your calls and your texts. We're on Free Speech TV. We're going to go to Jacob, watching us on YouTube, Baltimore, Maryland. Go ahead, Jacob.
Hey, Jeff. Thanks for taking my call.
Heck yeah.
I wanted to echo something that an earlier caller had said, that her sense was that we're more united than we are divided. And I totally agree with that. And actually, over the past several months, I, in an effort to be doing more, had actually started up with a few other people a new boycott, the Boycott for Our Democracy, which has one simple premise, and that is don't shop on Tuesdays. And the purpose of this boycott is that we're demanding that our politicians, or more accurately, the special interests that own them, allow our politicians to do their job and start passing legislation on the literally dozens and dozens of issues that have over 60% support in the country, which by the laws that we've made is a supermajority. And frankly, the other side doesn't even really get a say in a supermajority. You can't even filibuster that. And, we're talking about things like Medicare for all, like net neutrality, like legalizing cannabis, like investing in infrastructure, ending child separation, a progressive tax system, a huge range of issues which 60+% people are doing. And we're saying all we need to do as consumers is one day a week, don't shop. And what I realized that I and we cannot organize better than the Women's March, which was the biggest single-day march in history.
Yeah.
But it didn't stop people like Brett Kavanaugh from becoming a Supreme Court justice.
Yep.
And it didn't stop, and now we see that the Trump administration hasn't stopped, trying to take away our health care, despite the fact that 71% of people want something like Medicare for all. And so we're saying.
So what? So you're telling people don't shop on Tuesday, and the message by not shopping on Tuesday you want to deliver is change what? Change all the bad things? Change some subset of the bad things?
We're saying that there's an enormous number of issues which have 60+% support. That's a supermajority of the country that agrees with it. Some of them have 75+% support, which is a constitutional amendment level of agreement in the country. And so we're saying that the reason that those actions aren't being done is because our politicians, by and large, aren't good, safe actors.
I get that. I get that part. When does the boycott goes for the rest of our lives, or the boycott ends after a particular thing? The boycott is for all things on Tuesday, or just for targeted things on Tuesday?
We've done it a universal boycott because I think that the cognitive load of trying to create lists is just simply too much for people. You know, you try to take out your phone and figure out what Nestle is, supporting. So then, most people just won't do it. And then the other thing is, every time we try to create lists, I get a disagreement from people who I talk to is, who to boycott? And everyone has their own list.
Yeah.
And so we think that that's a dividing tactic, right?
So
there.
Is the boycott forever, or is the boycott end after a particular thing happens or a set of things happen?
I mean, well, I can't tell people when they think they have their democracy back.
Yeah.
But so I wouldn't presume to tell people to stop to start shopping on Tuesdays again until they think they have their democracy.
Understood. All right. Well, I appreciate it. And Jacob, I would say, had we had this conversation 10 years ago, I would have quibbled. I now mostly quibble with quibblers, people who take too much issue with one person's particular flavor of activism. I do think we need to be moving in more of a direction of mass demonstration. Appreciate what you're working on and the fact that you took time to call. We'll be back in just a little bit. And we are back on the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jefferson Smith. Following up on the documentary that's going to be on tonight on Free Speech TV, Power Struggle, is Paul Gunther, who's the director of Reactor Oversight, or the Reactor Oversight Project at Beyond Nuclear. The website is beyondnuclear.org. Paul Gunther, thanks for being with us. Paul, you there?
Yes, I am.
Terrific. So you are working to go beyond nuclear. What's your favorite energy source, and why is nuclear power your least favorite energy source?
Well, obviously, there's a broad range now that's deployed from solar to wind, but broadly it's renewable energy combined with energy efficiency and conservation. This is the 21st century energy policy, and it's time to phase out as quickly as possible from the nuclear power industry, which is dirty, dangerous, and has always been expensive, the most expensive way to boil water ever conceived. And now that we have seen...
So stick on that for a second. When the folks who promote nuclear power say, no, it's a really cost efficient, it's so much cheaper than other energy sources because it's so abundant. Bolster that claim that it's more expensive than other kinds.
Well, obviously, there are a host of hidden costs for nuclear power that are coming due, ranging from, because it's so inherently dangerous, there's not an insurance company in the world that will cover nuclear power and the tremendous liability that we've seen from accidents like Chernobyl and Fukushima. But aside from that, it's not economically competitive on an electricity market that is, looking for more diversity now from the availability of wind and solar. Solar power is now on par with fossil fuels and getting cheaper So, the argument that the industry's making is that if you get off nuclear, which is the most expensive way, that people will choose coal, and that's simply not true. We're seeing the cost of solar and wind dropping dramatically, and the cost of fissile and fossil fuel just going up like a skyrocket.
Go ahead.
That's the main. This industry's been, the nuclear industry's been built on myths from the very beginning, where it was the peaceful atom, it turned out to be a bomb. Where it was too cheap to meter, it's now too expensive to matter. And now they're making this new pitch that it's the only way we can reliably address climate change. And again, that's just part of this ongoing image shift that this industry's been adapt to very, very many times.
So before this conversation, if I were asked to characterize the debate, I'd be saying one side said, well, it's so much cheaper, and it doesn't have as much smoke, and it's safer now. You can have little ones. There's a college in my town. I think there's a small nuclear reactor under Reed College. I think Oregon State University, I think, has a little nuclear reactor there.
These are research reactors, yes.
And so it's not as bad anymore. You don't have Fukushima plants. And then the counter argument that I would have been ready with is, yeah, but I am worried that 100 years from now, our grandkids, we're looking at this like, what were you doing? Leaving us all this waste. It was enough that you jacked up the deficit. Exactly. It was enough that you jacked up the wealth disparities. What? This is the worst mess you could have. But you're going even further. You're saying that the positive claims of nuclear power are overstated or just misstated.
Well, obviously the only way that nuclear power can stay on the market these days is if the ratepayers and the taxpayers are funding, the industry through subsidization.
Yeah.
And this is, right now, the one thing hasn't changed about nuclear power is that it has an incredible, strong lobby. And that is at the Capitol Hill level as well as the state capitals. And the big battle right now is to keep the industry's lobby from essentially moving in on renewable energy portfolios and gutting them for nuclear power. And that's the big concern, is that the industry is now re-imaging itself as clean, given you don't see smokestacks.
Right. No, and I remember one of my I was going to say favorite memories. That's not true. Just one of my memories is I was a delegate to the National Convention some years back, and you get a little gift kit when you go. And in my gift kit was a squeeze ball, like a stress reliever, and it was a piece of clean coal. It was foam, clean coal. And I was like, I don't know. I mean, it is a clean coal because it's like foam, but it's not actually coal. And I think, and I hear where you're coming from and appreciate the call. One quick question that Nate really wants to ask is how many Fukushima-style power plants are in operation in the United States right now?
21, but that's going to change in June of this year, and with the closure of the Pilgrim nuclear power station in Cape Cod Bay, right there at Plymouth, Massachusetts.
Got it. So follow-up question, because we're about to go to break. What is the debate right now? So like when somebody says I'm for nuclear, what does that mean? Don't decommission those 21, add a 22 and 23, put in R&D money so we can make cleaner nuclear power. Where is the debate joined at this point?
Well, obviously right now, the industry does have a cadre of pro-nuclear Congress members, on both sides of the aisle, really. I mean, Cory Booker right now is one of the chief proponents of new nuclear on the Democratic
Heard of him. He's running for president. Oh, you went away without me sending you away. But appreciate, Paul Gunther, you very much for calling in. It's at Beyond Nuclear. You can also tweet us at Thom Hartmann or at Jefferson D. Smith. We appreciate you. We're going to come back with a couple speed rounds on what you're thankful for, ways for people to get engaged. It's Thank You Thursday.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We're going to be offering ways that you can get engaged and your calls with a couple speed rounds coming up right after this.
Our book club selection today is the brand new book from Dar Jamail, The End of Ice, Bearing Witness and Finding Meaning in the Path of Climate Disruption. The dedication of the book. This book is dedicated to the future generations of all species. Know that there were many of us who did what we could. This is from the introduction. The fall lasts long enough that I have time to watch the blue ice race upward, eons of time compressed into glacial ice, flashing by in fractions of seconds. I assume I've fallen far enough that I've pulled my climbing partner, Sean, into the crevasse with me. This is what it's like to die in the mountains, a voice in my head tells me. Just as my mind completes that thought, the rope wrenches my climbing harness up. I bounce languidly up and down as the dynamic physics inherent in the rope play themselves out. Somehow, Sean has checked my fall while still on the surface of the glacier. I brush the snow and chunks of ice from my hair, arms, and chest and pull down the sleeves of my shirt. Finding my glacier glasses hanging from the pocket of my climbing bib, I tuck them away. I check myself for injuries and incredibly find none. Assessing my situation, I find there's no ice shelf nearby to ease the tension from the rope, so Sean can begin setting up a pulley system to extract me. I look down, nothing but blackness. I look at the wall of blue ice directly in front of me, take a deep breath, and peer up into the tiny hole into which I'd fallen when I'd punched through the snow bridge spanning the crevasse. The same bridge Sean had crossed without incident as we made our way up Alaska's Matanuska Glacier toward Mount Marcus Baker in the Chugach Range. You get to look down one more time, then that's it, I tell myself out loud. Again, there's only a black and void yawning beneath me, swallowing everything, even sound. My stomach clenches. I remind myself to breathe. Sean, are you okay? I yell as I clamp my mechanical ascenders to the rope in preparation to climb up. Yeah, I'm all right, but I'm right on the edge, he calls back. I can't set an anchor to get out of the system, so don't ascend. We're going to have to wait for the other guys to catch up. Time passes. The onset of hyperthermia means I can't control my body from periodically shaking. To ignore my fear of dying, I gaze meditatively at the ice a few feet in front of me as I dangle. The miniature air pockets found in the whiter ice near the top of the glacier have long since been compressed, producing the mesmerizing beauty of centuries-old turquoise ice. Slightly deeper into the crevasse is ice that has been there since long before the Neanderthals. I hang suspended in silence, mindful not to move out of fear of dislodging Sean. Giving my full attention to the ice immediately within my vision, I focus on how the gently refracting light from above seems to penetrate and reflect off the perfectly smooth wall. Staring into it, the blue seems infinite. Despite the danger of my situation, the glacier's beauty calms me. Delicate snowflakes and their infinite possibilities of form land on mountainous terrain. Under its own weight, the snow is compressed into glaciers that scour and shape the face of the earth. Countless millions of tons of weight, aided by the force of gravity, push and pull these frozen rivers downhill, carving out cirques and troughs from uplifted geologic plates and sculpting the majestic heights of mountains that I have been drawn to since I was young. Eventually, our other two teammates arrive and work to extract Sean from his perch just 6 inches from the edge of the crevasse. All three of them set up a three-way pulley system. Laboriously, my teammates begin to haul me up, inches at a time, out of what nearly became my tomb. I continue to focus on the delicately shifting blades of blue in the ice as I draw closer to the surface, mesmerized by its raw beauty. My teammates pull me up to the lip of the crevasse. I repeatedly plunge the pick of my ice axe into the snow and haul myself out, never before as grateful for being on top of a glacier. I stand and gaze up at the mountain to the west, behind which the sun has just set. Snow plumes stream off one of its ridges, turned into ruddy red ribbons by the setting snow. Snowflakes flicker as they float into space. As relief floods my shivering body, I roar in gratitude and relief. Utterly overwhelmed by being alive and surrounded by the beauty of the mountain world, I hug each of my three climbing partners. Now safe, it sinks in how close to death I've been. That was Earth Day 2003. In hindsight, I believe the emotion I felt then stemmed in part from something else, a deeper consciousness that the ice that I had seen, which had existed for eons, was vanishing. 7 years of climbing in Alaska had provided me with a front row seat from where I could witness the dramatic impact of human-caused climate disruption. Each year we found the toe of the glacier had shriveled further. Each year for the annual early ice season festival on this glacier, we found ourselves hiking further up the crusty frozen mud left behind by rapidly retreating terminus. Each year the parking lot was moved closer to the glacier, only to be left further away as the ice withdrew. Even sections of Denali, which stands over 20,000 feet tall and is roughly 250 miles from the Arctic Circle, had undergone startling changes. The ice of its glaciers was disappearing quickly. Our planet is rapidly changing, and what we are witnessing is unlike anything that has occurred in nature or even geologic history. The heat-trapping nature of carbon dioxide and methane, both greenhouse gases, has been scientific fact for decades, and according to NASA, there is no question that increased levels of greenhouse gases must cause the Earth to warm in response. Evidence shows that greenhouse gas emissions are causing the Earth to warm 10 times faster than it should. And the ramifications of this are being felt quite literally throughout the entire biosphere. And then, he goes on, oceans are warming, etc. The End of Ice by Dar Jamail.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Too much of the media discussion asks merely what's going on, or asks the question is who's fighting with whom, or how can we demonstrate that there is a fight so that we can draw eyeballs or earballs and get more clicks, get higher Nielsen ratings. Rush Limbaugh has a podcast called The Morning Update. I almost apologize for plugging it, but I want to say this. It is 3 minutes long. The first 90 seconds are commercials. Maybe that's good news, because then it's only 90 seconds of Rush Limbaugh. But we advocate here for purpose-driven media. His 3-minute podcast makes really clear what his purpose is. I listened to about 5 episodes. It didn't take very long. I listened to podcasts at 2 times speed. So I can listen to 5 of them in 7.5 minutes. And since I skipped past the commercial, it really only took me like 4. And a couple of them was only 1 minute, the 3 minutes were commercials. Rush Limbaugh has made clear his purpose. His purpose is commerce. Without only engaging in the argument of the good things and bad things of commerce, democracy has to have its own purpose as well. And a purpose to help people, and a purpose that we're stronger together than we are apart, and a purpose to shed light, not only heat. And therefore, we do want to understand we do want to know what's going on. We also want to understand what's going on. We want to be able to make contextual connections. So the New York Times reports, Bill Barr's new Attorney General, forgetting that their former writer, or maybe they didn't forget, but they didn't remind, their former columnist had called him the cover-up general. When there was this analysis, when people were saying, oh, thank goodness, there's a grown-up. There's someone who's like a member of a country club that's not a Trump country club, and he's going to be there bringing us back to the Bush days. Forgetting that his role with the Bush days was clearing members of the executive branch of wrongdoing in Iran-Contra. Some of the best journalists that exist that do so much important stuff to help us understand what's happening on a day-to-day basis, or at least help us know about it, don't necessarily have the job of connecting the dots to helping us understand those things or putting it in a bigger context. And so we got to do some of that. And we also have to do something more. We have to do something about it. If this isn't just a chat circle for therapeutic purposes, which can be useful, or for anger-generating purposes, which if pivoted might be useful, or for entertainment purposes, and I'm deeply glad that at least a few people who are marvelous, who work on this show, who have jobs doing it, and thank you to everybody who supports the show so that can happen. We got to be building a community that can make democracy a little better, rather than a lot worse. We got to do things. That's why we're taking your calls. We're going to do a speed round right now. What are you grateful for? What are you thankful for? You can call in at 202-808-9925. It's 202-808-9925. What's your advice and or what do you recommend for people to do out there? What could impact structural change or just make people's lives a little bit better at the same time? Let's go to Ted, KPFK. He wins Most Patient Listener Award. Go ahead. Ted from Torrance.
Hello. Hi.
Hey, Ted. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for taking my call. Jeff, I'd like to say thank you to you for your program, and I'd like to give a shout-out to my book, A Cure for Slavery. It's similar to the public bank, but I outline a nonprofit central bank where people can claim first dibs on the equity of their labor, and there's a Facebook page, Public Nonprofit Central Bank, that everyone should check out. I post there regularly, and Public Nonprofit Central Bank with a labor-based economy, trickle inflation, solves unemployment, poverty, debt.
Addressing banking in a more purpose-driven way is a big deal. Ted, the book again is A Cure for Slavery Using a Central Bank. Is that the title?
Yes. A Cure for Slavery. Yeah. Check it out. It's on Amazon and all the electronic formats, Barnes & Noble, and my Facebook page, Public Nonprofit Central Bank.
Ted from Torrance, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeff. Have a great day.
Lynn from North Bend, Oregon.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
I can.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm working with a plethora of evolving consciousness groups, major religions and peace groups, for evolving heart and soul-based community services for all with a good basic guaranteed income with single payer for all so that we can unite our USA beyond race, religion, genders, and the political divides, help stop the hate individually and collectively because all the answers are within when anyone's angry or upset. So you can set up these new mental health, facilities that teach and train people with all the conscious evolutionary heart and soul-based Heart Math Institute programs and all the different inner guidance, inner peace, chakra openings and all the different soul therapies out there and soul parenting and soul mating,
connecting and
consciousness programs and spiritual cinema. Shout out to spiritual cinema.
After you talk about consciousness awakening, me saying, well, do you have a website? Feels sort of lame. But how do you want people to get engaged with this?
I have, there's two different ways. I have a YouTube. It's YouTube is Spiritual Emergency Training, has a lot of information on the YouTube, but also BB, Boy Sam, I'll say that, BoyBoySamRadio.com. So bbsradio.com, there's two stations, and they have archives, and they are flying. They are incredible.
Well, Lynn, thank you. Lynn, thank you so much for calling in.
Yeah, and I've had a radio show since 2007 there.
Oh, that's great.
Spiritual Emergency Training. Thank you.
All right, appreciate it. Thank you, Lynn. And I will say, my own set point is I will acknowledge too inflicted by Western culture, but ultimately I even just intellectually understand that if we are going to change the country, it is going to require consciousness changing, not only power changing. Or put another way, if we are going to change the power structure, we're also going to have to change ourselves and change sort of our common understanding of how we're supposed to move through the world. So appreciate that. Let's go to Richard, watching on Roku, Vancouver, Washington. Go ahead.
Good day to you, my friend. Good day to you. On Thank You Thursday, I just want to thank the organizations who locate, develop, crowdsource, fund candidates who work for real people, that being Justice Democrats, brand new Congress, Progressive Change Campaign Committee, and the newest Jeff Merkley's Blue Wave Project. I think this is the only way we're going to end the stranglehold of billionaires and corporations on our lawmakers and our executives.
Well, that's terrific. And I will say, if you're in Vancouver, Washington, on Roku, you can also check out, you might be able to get KXRW, which airs the Thom Hartmann Show on a daily basis, which is sister station.
I'm a founding member of KXRW.
Hey, thank you so much.
Thank you for your work.
Well, thank you so much. I was also going to plug X-Ray FM. You can get that. You can get that app and AM 1360 coming online, which I think also gets portions of Vancouver. But Richard, thank you so much.
There's one more, if I may.
Okay.
And that is ranked choice voting. I think it's the only way this nation is going to get to proportional representation. I'm thankful for the opportunity of ranked choice voting. Thanks, Jefferson.
Appreciate it. Charlie from Albuquerque, New Mexico.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing all right, Charlie. How you doing?
Good. You know, I've recently retired from county government in New Mexico. And I have a degree in political science. I consider myself a political scientist. And I've worked. Are you familiar with the Baldrige Performance Excellence Program?
I'm not.
This is a program that was designed during the Reagan administration by a gentleman by the name of Mac Baldrige. He was the Secretary of Commerce at the time in the Reagan administration. And this program was intended to and designed to help businesses make improvements. And they do a self-analysis, and they make a determination where gaps and omissions are so they can address those and improve business and the bottom line. Anyway, working for county government, and I was charged with implementing this particular program in a sense for local government. I think that it's branched out to where not only businesses are using it.
Well, that's great, Charlie. I appreciate it. And the
no, let me real quickly just give you my what I'm looking at here.
Okay, yeah, give it to us so we can get to the next caller. Speed round.
Okay, I did an analysis and to find out where our gaps and omissions are, and what our problems are. And our nation's number one problem, which a lot of problems fall under.
We got 20 seconds.
Is that we have a dysfunctional U.S. Constitution that was designed in the 18th century, and it does not meet the needs of 21st century Americans. It's
10 seconds.
It's a era Constitution, and people need to realize that.
All right, appreciate it, Charlie.
You bet.
And I'll also give another plug. People who work within government structures and work to make government, not just an argument about bigger or smaller government, but better government, work to make lines to the DMV shorter, look to make government websites more manageable, look to demonstrate that we can be stronger together than we are apart operationally. That's good stuff. That's good stuff. We're going to be back with a speed round 202-808-9925 with the big finish coming up next.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
This is your show, and we're going to try to get to all the calls, 202-808-9925. Denise from Calumet, Michigan. You're on the air on Free Speech TV.
Hi. Thanks for taking my call. I need to kind of remind people, because I'm going through this myself in spite of everything I'm doing to try to change things and calling Congress, etc. But it seems like ever since the Mueller report came out, Trump is going harder and faster at the people, and I think he's trying to take revenge.
Sure.
And I believe that people are going into a severe political depression, because I do it. And you have to remember that depression is anger turned inside out. And if you can get the depression back into the anger phase, but not be so angry that you're destructive, but be productive in doing what you can do to help this mess, then you're not walking around so depressed about all these torrents of things that are coming at us from the Republicans that are following in Trump's footsteps, which is sad. He is not fit to be president.
Denise, it's such a helpful point. It's odd, the timing of when I have been guesting recently, it always seems like something really big bordering on, overlapping with, squarely within the arena of a constitutional crisis comes up. And I realize that as I try to be a little bit more in touch, a little bit more aware of my own kind of emotional state and aware of other people's emotional states, that what you're saying is so critically important, that the tool of the authoritarian, or among the tools of the authoritarian, is to make us hopeless and depressed. And you're so right. And how do we, with self-care, with care for others, and I really appreciate that and hadn't thought of it sufficiently, and how do we make sure that that anger doesn't just turn, as you said, inside out to depression, but that we pivot it either by maintaining it or get it to something that's positive, that's impactful, doing something. Heck, I guess that's even why we're having the topic we're having today.
You have to try to do what you can do and know that you're only one person, and you just can't give up. I mean, you know, when you think about how overwhelming it is, people can give up. But the Democrats did take the Congress. There is hope. There is still investigations going on. The lies are out there, but the truth is also out there, and we have to keep going after the truth.
Denise, thank you so much for your call and for your wisdom.
Thank you.
Let's go to, I hope I'm getting this right. I think it's Claro, might be Claro from Redway, California.
Yeah, hi, Jeff. How you doing today?
Doing all right.
You look really clean today, dude. Are you going to court or what?
I'm wearing a tie today. I just thought, I don't know why. I thought at least one time I should wear a tie. At least one time I should take it serious. Not just come in a comfortable shirt, but wear an uncomfortable shirt to deal with the discomfort of the country. I don't know. That's not exactly why. I just thought, I'd wear a tie one day.
Okay.
Am I going to court? I'm not going to court today. I've been to court, but I'm not going to court today.
Okay. So the whole show, you've been asking, and everybody's talking about all the good things they're doing out in the world.
Yeah.
And then I completely support that. But you mentioned a friend of yours who earlier in the show who has been an angel and is going through cancer or something right now.
Yep.
And so I wanted to bring it back down to the individual for a second. And because we've lost in our community a lot of people. Okay, I want to bring it back down to the fact that individual health is the most important thing.
Amen. We're on with Claro, who was making his case from Redway, California. Off there, finish your thought. Offer your thought about how people got to focus on individual health.
It all starts with what you eat. Cancer is caused by and cured by what we eat. We need to eat clean food. We need to eat simple food. We need to not create bad karma by killing other mammals to eat. There's a whole, but it's up to the individual.
Thank you so much, Clara. And while I agree with everything you just said, I also think there's things we need to do with our food system, with our transportation system, with our revenue system to make sure, with our subsidization choices, to make it easier to make those personal choices. But I hear you loud and clear. People got to take care of themselves.
You're right, and then we can help others.
Appreciate it.
And yeah, I appreciate you, man, and have a great evening.
All right, you too. Marcia from Raleigh, North Carolina. It is Thank You Thursday. We're talking about ways that people can take their energy. We got a call earlier from Denise who says that what depression is anger turned inside out, and depression leads to weakness. We got to take our anger and turn it into something positive. We're advising people on positive things that they can do. Clara was saying, well, make sure you at least eat healthy. As a famous person once said, eat food, mostly plants, and not too much. Marcia, what do you have to say?
Okay, well, it's Marcia. I just wanted to share a project that I've been working on. It's called the Bill of Rights for Voting Equality. I'm pretty sure you can Google that. I have a change.org petition. It's also on the petition site, and it's also Facebook by the same name, the Bill of Rights for Voting Equality. It is fundamental structural changes to our voting system, from hand-counted paper ballots. And I might even make another change to it, because I've lately been thinking about mandatory voting, because I feel like that will avoid all these cross-check lists and these reducing locations for where you can vote. I do not agree with ranked choice voting by itself. There's a lot of videos that are on there that tell you a lot about voting. I got a lot of my information from the Center for Election Sciences, who studied voting from around the country, around the world. But basically, if you are not including third-party people into your system, then your system is not working right. Because all of the people are not Republicans and Democrats. We are a lot of different varied things. The Constitution says we have to vote every 2 years. It says that it should represent the people in a proportional way, but it does not say how you score the election, how you read the results of the election. It's only capitalists that say one person wins and everybody loses.
Yeah.
We should be more like the Union of States, where everybody has a representative. Like when you start a game, you select your token to represent you through the game.
Yeah.
Everybody can have a representative at all times.
And so, Marcia, Marcia, where can people find out more on the voting system work? Agree with you and agree on the primacy, on the first, as Elizabeth Warren said when she was asked. Where can people find out more?
The Bill of Rights for Voting Equality. If you Google that, it will come up.
Bill of Rights for Voting Equality. Marcia from Raleigh, thank you so much for calling in.
One quick other thing.
Oh, I think we're only supposed to have one thing. I'll give you 10 seconds.
Oh. So your personal self, Marshall Rosenberg on YouTube, Nonviolent Communication.
All right, I appreciate it. I'll take any advice on nonviolent communication I can get. Appreciate it, Marcia. The got a couple texts in. I should call them tweets, not exactly texts. We got from Eco Peace Christian. Appreciate the topic, asking for positive solutions. Some suggestions: cheap verified elections. And if you Google cheap verified elections, you can find out more. Dimesh giving a plug, well, I guess a counter, appreciating our commentary on nuclear weapons and nuclear energy more specifically. Judy Springsteen, again, saying thank you for filling in. All politics is local. Huge thank you for continuing to stress that our everyday actions and choices are directly connected to and reflected back to us in the results of our local elections. Wanted also to respond. Somebody said, hey, let's be careful with the phrase clean eating. Poor people are not. They used a curse word dirty. And we do need to change our language and change our systems to make it easier for people to weigh in. One person is going to have to call in tomorrow, Scott, who wanted a debate on Adam Schiff comments on foreign influence. Actually, how much time do we got? 1 minute. We got 1 minute. Scott, we're going to need to debate that tomorrow. You've been waiting a long time. He wanted to make the case that illegal voters are voting. He wanted to make that case from Racine. What I want to do is say thank you to everybody who called in on topic today. It was Thank You Thursday, and all the wonderful things that people had to shout out, all the things that are going on, things that you can do. Greg, vote with your dollars. Jeff, Thursday night celebrations. Dr. Laura, election integrity. David, establish local community, a neighborhood association, what he did. Jason on campaign finance. Mathmactivist, lowering the voting age, democracy in the workplace, labor organizing, I think they mean. Gretchen and Susie, educate yourself and help educate others. Adam Schiff, standing up against wide-scale corruption. Ellen Brown, public banking, advocating. This is something you can do in local communities. Robbie Lepser talked to us about the Power Struggle movie. That's tonight on Free Speech TV. Richard on ranked choice voting. That overlaps a little bit with Marcia, who was just talking to us about voting systems. Claro was saying, take care of yourself, eat well. Denise, don't get depressed. Take your anger, pivot that not inside out to depression, but towards positive activity. Whether you're doing that local community, whether you're doing it statewide, whether you're doing that with direct service, take that negative action, turn it to something positive. My sign off, you've heard it before. I should explain it quickly. Most of the problems that face us, in so many respects, aren't anyone's job. Whose job is it to fix the climate? Whose job is it to make sure that an education system is suitable for this century? It's nobody's job, so it has to be everybody's job. It has to be all of our jobs. You are the coalition of the benevolently irrational, the good people doing good things for no good reason. With you, democracy is possible. You are priceless. Definition of priceless, worth a lot, not for sale. I'll be back tomorrow, and honored to do it.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
We say fight back!